Hello and welcome. I'm Leigh Ann Gerrans and you're watching W News, broadcasting live from the Al Arabiya headquarters. These are our top stories. 2 people have died and thousands of residents have been forced to flee their homes as wildfires blaze through California. Rescuers continue their search for survivors in China following the aftermath of the Tibet earthquake. British special forces are accused of getting away with murder as an inquiry into their conduct in Afghanistan is released. And a body is discovered in the Italian Dolomites during a hunt for 2 missing hikers. To our top story, and over 30,000 people have had to flee their homes around the city of Los Angeles as raging wildfires send buildings and vegetation up in flames. More than 200,000 homes and businesses are without power in the area, and California Governor Gavin Newsom has declared a state of emergency. Caroline Malone has this report.
Firefighters are working tirelessly to try and put out 3 major fires that have burned out of control in North Los Angeles, but so far have not been able to contain them. The area of Pacific Palisades is particularly badly hit. Thousands of people rushed out of their homes as the flames set in. At least one woman, though, rushed in to try and put out the flames at her parents' home.
They're 90 years old. They've lived in this house for 75 years, and they've had the same insurance, and these insurance people decided to cancel their fire. And we're going through this, and it just happened, and they have no fire insurance.
Down the road, staff at an assisted living centre for the elderly barely got people out in time.
Basically, the fire started coming from down the mountain. We noticed it moving pretty quickly, so we did start evacuating everybody. I was running up to the 3rd story, 2nd story, carrying people down, just picking them up, because we do have a lot of wheelchair people in here. So we did eventually, we were able to get everybody out of here at a timely manner before the building actually went into flames.
Officials have warned that things are only likely to get worse as major wind gusts fan the flames across a wider area. 3,000 acres have already burned up between Santa Monica and Malibu. President Biden had to cancel a planned trip in the area as flames grounded Air Force One. He says a federal grant has been approved to help reimburse the state of California for its major fire response. Caroline Malone, Al Arabiya News, Washington.
In the last hour, the Los Angeles Fire Department confirmed 2 people have died. Here's what County Fire Chief Anthony Maroney had to say during a press conference.
The Palisades fire is located in both LA City and LA County. We have well over 5,000 acres that have burned, and the fire is growing. We have no percentage of containment. We have an estimated 1,000 structures destroyed, and also no reported fatalities, and a high number of significant injuries to residents who did not evacuate, in addition to first responders who were on the fire line. For the Eaton fire, we have over 2,000 acres burning at this time, and the fire continues to grow with 0% containment. We have over 500 personnel assigned, and unfortunately, we have 2 reported fatalities to civilians. Unknown cause at this time, and we do have a number of significant injuries.
We can now speak to LA residents Olly, Israel and Eyewitness Tanner Choles, who are live from Santa Monica in California for us this evening. Thank you so much to both of you for joining the show. Olly and Tanner, you both had to run out of the house to escape the fire. Tell us about that, and are you both now safe?
Yeah, currently we are in Santa Monica at a friend's house. It was a very eerie sight. We were both pretty calm and just like trying to do our best with what was given to us at the time. Originally, we went up to scope out the fire along Toluca Canyon. And so as the fire crept closer, Orly's house was just down the road. And so as the flames were getting closer, I was like, hey, man, we're going to go and we should take care of your house. And so we went down there and started fireproofing the house as much as we could. So like, dousing it with water, getting anything flammable off of the deck and the backyard and that kind of thing. But eventually the flames it was just too much and we had to leave.
Yeah.
Olly, it was your house that you had to try and fireproof there, as Tanner just said. Do you know what condition it is in, or have you heard anything at all?
It wasn't in great condition when we left, and I have only heard from some people that left after us that the whole street was just on fire. Every tree was exploded when we'd left. And I'm optimistic, but, the house isn't burned down until I hear it's burned down.
Well, you must be so relieved to be alive and at safety now. How are your friends and neighbours doing?
Well, I think that I can either come out of this as the person whose house burned down, or come out of this as the person who discovered how resourceful and how connected this community was. I haven't had this much communication and connection with so many people that have reached out. I feel surrounded by love and support, and I'm sure that other people in the neighborhood feel the same way. And even though we may have lost every material thing we have gained or kept the realization that the people around us are here to support us, and we'll get through it.
Community positivity at a time like this is so important. Many people are saying that they've never seen wildfires like this. We know California is prone to this sort of thing. In your experience, have both of you ever experienced anything along these lines?
Yeah, I was talking to a local guy who lived here for like 50 years, and he said he's never seen anything quite like this. I do know from the National Weather Service here in the U.S., they're calling this the windstorm of the decade. And so these kind of winds of, gusts up to 70 to over 100 miles an hour. I don't know what it is in km, but it's quite significant for this area, even though we're used to like wildfires and that kind of thing. But something to this caliber has not been seen in years. And so I've never experienced anything close to this. And it's been jarring, to say the least. It's been insane to experience.
Over 30,000 people have been... Like oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was just saying, I've lived here all my life, haven't seen anything like this.
Well, I'm glad that you're both safe. Over 30,000 people have been evacuated from their homes as fire services attempt to tackle the blazes. What was the temperature and the atmosphere and the moment like for both of you? And what were authorities saying to you when the fire was becoming increasingly closer?
Well, we didn't see any authorities. We saw one fire truck as we were leaving, but it was mostly civilians with garden hoses fighting small fires. And we left because it was just too hot. Our faces are burned, my eyebrows, my eyes are still stinging because the fire was just, we stopped fighting the fire when we couldn't go near it because it was so hot and we couldn't reach it with the garden hose. And that was just time where we fought the battle. Yeah, and I also felt like we were, some might think that it was a little bit foolish for us to even stay there that long, but I'm a storm chaser. I've been chasing for 16 years. I've been around different fires as well. And I just knew that with the way the winds were and everything, that we were in a good position up until we had to leave. We had plenty of escape routes going south down the ridge. But it was the sound of just homes literally being engulfed in flames, or just whole brush piles just igniting all at once, is something that I will never forget. It was insane. Yeah.
I would just like to say thank you to both of you for joining us this evening and bringing us your story. I hope that you're both safe. LA residents Olly, Israel, and Eyewitness Tanner Charles, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Now to China, and the search for survivors entered a second day today after a strong earthquake killed at least 126 people and damaged more than 3,000 buildings in a remote part of the Chinese region of Tibet near Everest. Another 188 people were injured after the earthquake hit the foothills of the Himalayas at around 9 a.m. local time on Tuesday, according to Chinese state media. Laura Westbrook has this report.
Chinese state media said the earthquake struck at 9:05 a.m. local time, with the epicenter located in Tingri. This is a rural county in a remote part of Tibet, near the Himalayan border with Nepal. Hours later, the death toll has started to rise, and we're getting a picture of the damage. Video on Chinese state media from the area showed hundreds of houses had collapsed and debris in the road, making it hard for people to get around. In photos published by state media, rescuers appeared to be digging through piles of rubble from toppled houses using ropes, shovels, and working by hand. Now, Tibet sits on the seismically active Himalayan region and is prone to earthquakes because of the collision of the Indian and Eurasian tectonic plates. The closest city to the quake's epicenter was Tibet's second largest city of Shigatse, home to about 800,000 people, and it's also regarded as a holy site, as the seat of the Pancham Lama, the second highest spiritual leader in Tibetan Buddhism after the Dalai Lama. Now, hundreds of soldiers have been deployed, as well as fire and rescue workers, to search for people. But aftershocks, the remote location, and cold temperatures of up to minus 15 degrees Celsius are hampering those efforts. Chinese President Xi Jinping called for all-out efforts to rescue people. He's also ordered officials to minimize casualties and to resettle those whose homes were damaged. The Vice Premier, Zhang Guojing, has also been dispatched to the area to guide the work. Tremors and aftershocks were felt in neighbouring India as well, and Nepal, where residents in the capital, Kathmandu, reportedly ran out of their homes Tuesday morning when they felt the quake, but there were no immediate reports of damage. Nepal has sent more than 2,500 police officers to assess damage and to look for victims. The epicenter was also around 75 kilometers north of Mount Everest. Local authorities have closed down a base camp. And winter is not a popular season for climbing the world's highest mountain, and many residents have migrated to lowland areas. But some tourists do visit the area. The Himalayan region is prone to powerful earthquakes. In 2015, a quake in Nepal with a magnitude of 7.8 killed nearly 9,000 people.
Laura Westbrook there, thank you for that report. Now, an inquiry looking into the behaviour and tactics of UK special forces in Afghanistan claims that SAS had a golden pass to get away with murder in the country during 2010 and 2013. Today, evidence from 7 witnesses was released as part of the independent inquiry ordered by the Ministry of Defence, which detailed concerns about alleged war crimes committed by British military in Afghanistan more than a decade ago. We can now go live to London to speak to our correspondent there, Olly Barratt. Olly, thank you so much for joining us this evening. Some shocking details have been revealed today. Can you give us some more about what we've heard and about the concerns that have been raised?
Yes, certainly some shocking claims that we have been reading in the evidence that has been released. Evidence from witnesses talking to the inquiry, from special forces units talking about colleagues of theirs in other special forces units. We heard that description of the so-called golden pass that some of the witnesses felt was given essentially to the SAS Special Forces unit with regards to operations carried out against Taliban suspects in Afghanistan during that period between 2010 and 2013. The claims are that there was effectively a culture of impunity that the SAS units felt had built up, and that oftentimes there would be Afghans murdered, in the words of some of the witnesses so far, in a way that would have potentially meant that war crimes were being committed. We've heard descriptions of so-called dropped weapons, which is when it is claimed SAS forces may have left weapons around the scenes close to people that had been killed to give the idea that they had been armed at the time, when perhaps in fact they had not been. Flat-packed is how one witness described hearing from another Special Forces personnel member when talking about some of those people killed in Special Forces operations. So certainly a series of shocking claims being laid out by a series of witnesses.
Olly, this all came to light after a TV documentary reported that soldiers from SAS had killed 54 people in so-called suspicious circumstances. The Ministry of Defence then ordered this inquiry. Has the inquiry found the TV documentary's claims to be true at all?
We haven't got to that point yet. At this point, what we're seeing is the release of evidence and submissions and testimony to the inquiry. The reason it's happening in this way, as you say, is because the identity of individuals who are giving evidence is not being released for reasons of national security. Several of them have talked about fearing for their own safety in coming up with these allegations. The hearings are being held in private, but the inquiry wants to be as transparent, it says, as possible. And so after the event, we are getting releases of some of the evidence that has been put forward. Now, it has to be said at this point that this is still claims being made by witnesses. This is still testimony being given to the inquiry. We haven't got yet to the stage of any of this being said to be valid or truthful, or any kind of conclusions being drawn by the inquiry. There is a long way to go until we get to that point.
Olly, in 60 seconds, if possible, is there any reason to believe that the Ministry of Defence will have to look at taking complaints and concerns more seriously in the future in light of this?
Well, certainly the added scrutiny of this inquiry may put that pressure on the Ministry of Defence. For now, the MOD is saying that it won't comment on an ongoing inquiry or indeed on Special Forces operations, and I suspect that will be the refrain until the inquiry concludes. But there have also been, off the back of this documentary and off the back of this inquiry, fresh allegations around Special Forces conduct in places like Syria and Libya as well. So perhaps that scrutiny, that added scrutiny, is already happening.
Olly Barratt in London, thank you so much for joining us. Now let's take a look at some of the other stories making headlines today. President-elect Donald Trump has repeated his takeover plans for Greenland and the Panama Canal. Trump believes they are both critical to American national security and wouldn't rule out using military or economic force to acquire them. Both Denmark and Panama have rejected any suggestion that they would give up territory. Now, Israeli strikes have killed at least 22 people in Gaza today, according to Palestinian medics. At least 10 were killed in the Sheikh Radwan area of Gaza City, whilst another 5 died in nearby Ziton suburb. It comes as the bodies of 2 Israeli hostages, a father and a son, are found in Gaza, according to Times of Israel. Italian journalist Cecilia Sala, who was detained in Iran last month, has been freed and has landed back safely in Rome, according to the Italian government. Sala was detained on the 19th of December and held in solitary confinement in Iran's Evin prison, 3 days after an Iranian engineer was arrested in Milan on a US warrant. The news was broken by Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni's officials, who said that Sala had been freed thanks to intense work on diplomatic and intelligence channels. An investigation into the Met Police handling of allegations against former Harrods boss Mohammed Al-Fayed has been launched today. It will look into any missed opportunities or failures by officers to properly investigate the reports made back in 2008. London's police force is currently reviewing 21 allegations made before Al-Fayed's death in 2003. And Taylor Swift is being credited with helping UK music sales reach a 20-year high in 2024. £2.4 billion was made last year, driven by streaming and a revival in vinyl. Swift's latest album, The Tortured Poets Department, was the best-selling album of the year, selling 783,000 copies. Her record-breaking worldwide Eras tour also contributed an estimated £1 billion to the UK economy. Let's go to Italy now, where a body has been discovered in the search for 2 British hikers who went missing in the Dolomites. Aziz Izzat and Samuel Harris from London were last heard from on the 1st of January and did not fly back to the UK as scheduled on the 6th of January. Italy's Alpine Rescue Service said a body was found, unfortunately lifeless, buried under the snow after a helicopter search on Wednesday morning. We can now catch up with our correspondent in Italy, Giles Gibson. Giles, good evening to you and thank you for joining us. What more do we know about the body that has been discovered earlier today?
Well, Italian authorities are telling us that they believe this body is that of Samuel Harris, the 35-year-old who was part of this 2-man hiking team. They're saying this body was located at high altitude up in the Dolomite Mountains, in the area where they picked up the final phone signal from this 2-man hiking group. In terms of the cause of death for this body, they're saying at this stage that they are still trying to work that out. It's still unclear, although they have put forward one theory that the cause of death could be due to a fall from a height. The word they used was from above. In terms of the next steps, well, clearly local authorities will be trying to make that identification of that body conclusive, final, and also, in the meantime, the search and rescue effort high up in the Dolomite Mountains is still very much ongoing.
Search and rescue teams have really struggled in the last few days because of weather conditions and because of light. Is the search now on to find the second hiker, and are conditions better?
Well, the local authorities have been using 2 different tactics, really, to try to sort of run this search and rescue operation. On the one hand, sort of scouring the area from above using helicopters, in particular trying to pick up any signals that might be coming from electronic devices in that area high up in the Dolomites Mountains. They've also deployed dog teams right up in these very hard-to-reach areas. These are teams that are very experienced in terms of working in areas where there have been avalanches. As you indicate, at some point on Wednesday, they were forced to stop the search due to deteriorating weather conditions. And of course, now darkness will have fallen over that part of northern Italy. So we're still waiting for the latest updates from the Italian authorities. But we believe that really the search and rescue operation is going to intensify once again in the early hours of Thursday morning local time, once the sun rises once again and they can just get a better picture of the area around them.
Giles, both these men have been described as experienced mountaineers, hikers. They go out fairly often. Has there been any reaction from their families at all?
We haven't had any reaction to the news of this first body being located by Italian authorities, but we have been told that family members of both men are on the ground in Italy and that also they're receiving psychological support during what just must be an unimaginably tough time for them. Just so many question marks around the fate of their loved ones. We've also had some comments from the girlfriend of Aziz Ziriat, the girlfriend named Rebecca Dimmock, saying, as you say, that they were experienced hikers. She talked about how they wanted to get out of nature during this holiday, or get out into nature during this holiday, that they planned to celebrate the new year, to bring in the new year by drinking red wine in one of the shelters high up in the Dolomite Mountains where they were staying. But clearly this end-of-year trip, this holiday, those celebratory sort of conditions appear to have taken a tragic turn.
Giles Gibson in Rome, thank you so much for that. Now let's take a look at the top business news. Luxury British car maker Rolls-Royce is expanding its Goodwood factory and global headquarters to meet the growing demand for bespoke models. It's planning to invest more than £300 million so it can build customised versions of its cars for the super-rich. Rolls-Royce sold 5,712 cars in 2024, down from its record the year before, but the total value of its sales was higher due to it selling more bespoke vehicles. Now, the Washington Post has announced it will lay off around 100 workers in an attempt to stem growing losses. According to reports, the job cuts will mainly affect employees on the business side of the U.S. newspaper, which is owned by Amazon founder Jeff Bezos. The layoffs come at a time of growing turmoil for the paper after Bezos broke with tradition and blocked an endorsement of Kamala Harris ahead of the U.S. presidential election in November. Turning to sports news now, and UK Athletics and its former head of sport have been charged with manslaughter following the death of a Paralympian in 2017, according to the Crown Prosecution Service. The United Arab Emirates athlete Abdullah Hayayi died after a metal throwing cage fell on him while he was training for the shot put in London. The 36-year-old Paralympian was pronounced dead at the scene. West Ham have sacked their head coach Julian Lopetegui after 8 months in the job. The club, who are currently 14th in the Premier League, are expected to announce Graham Potter as his replacement. Andy Murray has started training Novak Djokovic at Melbourne Park ahead of the start of the Australian Open on Sunday. The Serbian split from his longtime coach Goran Ivanisevic after he failed to win a major last year and hopes Murray can bring some new insights to his game. Djokovic has won an all-time record 24 Grand Slam titles. Winning the Australian Open will give him that unprecedented 25th, making him the greatest of all time. And France's World Cup winning manager Didier Deschamps is stepping down after next year's tournament in the US, Canada and Mexico. The 56-year-old has been in charge of the side since 2012, making him the country's longest-serving coach. He led the team to victory at the 2018 World Cup, as well as reaching the final of the 2022 tournament in Qatar and Euro 2016 on home soil. Now to a reminder of our top stories. 2 people have died and thousands of residents have been forced to flee their homes as wildfires blaze through California. Rescuers continue their search for survivors in China following the aftermath of the Tibet earthquake. British special forces are accused of getting away with murder as an inquiry into their conduct in Afghanistan is released. And a body is discovered in the Italian Dolomites during a hunt for 2 missing hikers. And that's all for us on W News. Thanks for joining us this evening. Riz Khan is coming up next, and don't miss Tom Burges Watson with GNT. Good night and thank you for joining us.
stories, we go beyond the headlines.
From the latest breaking news to in-depth coverage of global events.
We're not bought or sold. Nobody owns us.
The loss of life, the destruction of property. The conflicts are such a terrible thing.
Context and analysis to help you see the full picture.
The world is in a very dangerous place.
Join us on Arabiya News.
It's very impressive.
Where knowledge meets perspective.
Hello, I'm Riz Khan. Welcome to the show. The world is readjusting to the dramatic and sudden events in Syria this week. The end of the al-Assad regime marks a new chapter for Syrians at home and refugees overseas. And it also marks a potential realignment of the balance of power in the region and further afield. For all of these interested parties, the future of Syria presents both risks and opportunities. And that's what we'll tackle in this episode of the show. But Turkey is seen by many as the key player in negotiations over Syria's future. It's been host to 3 million Syrian migrants, and Ankara is keen to ensure that the fallout from the regime change doesn't result in the establishment of an autonomous Kurdish state near its border. I'm joined now by Cihat Yayce, who led the Turkish Navy until his demotion by President Recep Tayyip Erdogan in 2020. Admiral Yayce is now an author, academic, and strategist. Admiral Yayce, it's good to have you on the show. Now, I've got to start by asking, what are Turkey's goals in Syria now that the Assad government has fallen?
Yeah, I thank you very much for having me. And, mainly, basically, Turkey has 3 priorities with respect to my mind. The first is to cleanse Syria of the terrorists, especially PKK, YPG, and SDF. And the second is the return of the Syrian refugees to their country. And lastly, to give the Syrian Turks a status that will guarantee their political and cultural rights. These are the main 3 priorities.
Now, Admiral, of course, it's recognized how important these developments are on Turkey's situation. And I wonder, what has been the impact of what's happened in Syria on President Erdogan's influence and status in the region?
So President Erdogan is the head of the Turkish Republic, and Turkish Republic is the most stable, secure, democratic, and westernized state in the region. So, and the only state in that region which is a NATO member. So that's why Turkey is very important state in that region, for the region and also for the Western world and also for the NATO alliance.
Admiral, there are some who suspect Turkey actively encouraged the opposition forces of the HTS along with the Syrian National Army in a limited military operation that would encourage President al-Assad to agree to a peaceful settlement that could then lead to the return of 3 million refugees from Syria. But in fact, it went further than expected and led to accidental regime change. Now, the Turkish government has denied any involvement. What's your view on that?
Yeah, I exactly believe that what the Turkish authorities says. Turkey has really supporting Syrian National Army and Syria's temporary government, so transition government, which are established and supported also by the role or the participation or the contribution of Turkish Republic. But HTS is a very different organization, and there is no involvement of Turkish Republic for that organization establishment or improvement or the operations or whatever it is. So Turkey is supporting Syrian National Army. And Syrian National Army has not involved in that operation or revolution directly.
Admiral. Actually, a related question on this. Turkish-backed Syrian National Army forces have basically launched operations on territories held by the Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Forces, which are backed by the US. And there have been reports that the Turkish Air Force conducting airstrikes in Syria's northeast. Is Turkey in the process of undertaking a major offensive?
First of all, I said before that the first priority of Turkish Republic is to cleanse terrorist organizations, especially PKK, YPG, from the borders of Turkey and indeed from Syria. And this is a long-run struggle, and it is a determinative. You know, there is a determination of Turkish Republic for struggling that terrorist organization. It is not a Kurdish-led organization. It is a terrorist-led organization. Terrorist organization. And Turkish struggle has not begun with this, revolution. This is a long-run struggle, and this is just a continuation of that struggle. And indeed, by taking the opportunity of this revolution, terrorist PKK and YPG has been trying to get more lands in Syria. So Turkey has seen it. So that's why Turkey is taking the precautions for its national security.
Understood. Understood. Sir, Admiral, you've mentioned the United States' involvement, and I'm wondering, how do you expect this potential friction between two NATO members, Turkey and the US, to be resolved, and how might Donald Trump's presidency affect that relationship?
It doesn't, I think it doesn't matter who is the president of the United States, because United States is a state. So it doesn't matter who is the president, because the targets and the main policies of the United States will not change with respect to my opinion. So there's slightly changes in their ways to obtain their targets. So that's why Trump had supported before Biden YPG, and also he also assigned a rank to the terrorist leader Mazlum Abdi as a general. So it doesn't matter who is the president of the United States, and it doesn't. So Turkish struggle against terrorism will not change with respect to who is the president of the United States.
But Admiral, you're both NATO members. That's really the heart of it.
Yeah. So, for example, Al-Qaeda or ISIS, how come they are the threats to the United States? How come? But we accept that if a nation, if a member of NATO has perceiving an organization as a terrorist organization with respect to its national security and the national interests, so as an alliance member, we accept it as a terrorist organization. So that's why I do not understand why Turkey accepting terrorist United States perception towards the organizations as a terrorist organization, whatever it is, but United States is not accepting, which is directly threat to Turkish national security. those organizations. So they are not accepted as a terrorist organization. This is a contradiction with their NATO alliance.
Right. So Admiral, the divisions remain. Let me bring in one more factor here as we return to the look at Syria. Russian support for the al-Assad administration was a point of concern. How will the fall of the regime affect Turkey's relationship with Russia?
Oh, Russia, really, in reality, I do not believe that Russia has supported Assad regime. Russia took the advantage of the geopolitical position, geopolitical situation. And so Russia has behaved as an opportunist state. So Russia said that I'm going to support you, but you have to give me some bases and some responsibilities in Syria. So they came to Syria and they took 2 bases, but never and honestly supported Assad regime, because I would like to hint that Israel, aircrafts, air forces have been bombing Syria for several years, but Russia hasn't shown any reluctance to Israeli planes. And also, YPG, PKK, which is a terrorist organization supported by the United States and Israel, have occupied almost 1/3 of Syria. So, but Russia has not shown any reluctance.
Okay. Well, Admiral, with the regime change, things might change. So how would the loss of its air and naval bases affect Russia's influence in the region if that happens?
So we will see that. Will they lose or will they keep their bases over there? Because Russia doesn't show any reluctance to that revolution. Even Assad begged for help and support from Russia and Iran. They didn't give any support, real support. So I think there is a bargain between the states who has interest and involvement in that Syrian revolution. So we will see the result of the bargaining, and maybe those 2 bases will stay in Syria with respect to the bargain.
Well, we have Iran, as you just mentioned, and that has effectively lost its land bridge to Lebanon for now, along with its influence in Syria. What kind of impact is this going to have on the Iranian-led axis of resistance, as it's called, and also on Iran's national security?
So, first of all, I do not see any Iranian national security issue in Syria, because no border, there is no border between Syria and Iran. So Iran's behavior to date has constantly opened space for Israel and provided justification for Israeli occupations. What I can say, really, it is even possible to say that Iran is a sacred partner of Israel. So I think
that is an interesting perspective, Admiral. Now, interestingly enough, also, the fall of the al-Assad government provoked an immediate response from many of the 6 million Syrian refugees around the world, half of which are in Turkey, wanting to return to their homeland. I know you feel strongly about the refugee situation. President Erdogan announced the opening of the border gate to manage the expected exodus. Do you think that is a welcome move, or is that premature while the country is still in transition?
Yeah, what I can say is there are millions of refugees in Turkey. And they have an impact on even inflation, on economic problems in Turkey, and even on the negative effect, very negative effect on the healthcare system of Turkey, and that the population of the refugees in Turkey is more than many European states' population. So there is a huge load on the Turkish Republic and Turkish nation. First of all, they have disrupted demographic structure of Turkey. So therefore, I don't think there will be any negative aspects of Turkey in terms of their departure.
So, Admiral, just because we only have a couple of minutes left, I want to get your perspective on this. Who do you regard as the main winner from the downfall of the Assad regime?
Yeah, Israel and PKK-YPG.
Simple as that. It's they're going to benefit the most.
Yeah, and indeed, United States.
We'll have to see. It's going to be an interesting time ahead. Admiral, I hope we get a chance to talk again. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you, sir. Israel has reacted quickly to events in Syria with more than 100 airstrikes against military targets in the country. The Israeli government says it's destroying chemical weapons and military hardware to prevent it being used against Israelis by what it calls extremists. And Israeli forces have advanced from the occupied Golan Heights to set up a buffer zone to prevent an October the 7th style attack. I'm joined now by the former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Olmert. Ehud Olmert, thank you for joining the show, sir.
Hello.
Let me start by asking, what are the potential risks and opportunities for Israel from the events now taking place in Syria?
Well, certainly the event in Syria is dramatic, is historically significant. After so many years, the house of Assad, which started with his father, has been removed and was rejected completely. It was a result of a lot of corruption, I think, and these are the after effects of what took place in the last decade in Syria. The fact that Bashar Assad was personally responsible for the killing of 500,000 of his own citizens is something that was not forgotten or was not forgiven. And finally, it took years, but when the challenge came, there was no army and no one that was ready to fight for him. And that has collapsed. And the assistance of some superpowers, including Russia and Iran, was not sufficient, and they actually lost their holding position in Syria, which is perhaps the most significant outcome at this point. The fact that Syria is now controlled by some, I have to say, unknown elements. We don't really know all of them. We know some, something about them, but I don't think that we know enough about them. What is the strength? What is the power base? What are their plans? What are they going to do? The one thing which is obvious is that the Syrian army, which used to be a very serious military power, that was a threat to Israel from the north, has disappeared. The power base that was close to Hezbollah in the Lebanon, which was their supplier and their supporter, has disappeared, which is, of course, a significant weakening of the threat of Hezbollah as well. And so in these two ways, I think for Israel, this is a positive development. However, it's too early to judge what are the long-range consequences the takeover by fundamentalist, extremist military force, and what may be the possible ramifications. I think it's too early. We have to be very careful, and we have to make sure that they have no access to serious weapons that might cause serious damage.
I will touch on some of those points in a moment, sir. But that's the question everyone is asking, what comes next? And is there any real reason to suspect that an anti-Israeli extremist group might now form a new government?
Well, I think that that seems to be the most natural outcome. They are not friends of Israel. They are extremist, fundamentalist, ISIS by nature. I don't know if by affiliation, I don't exactly know who all of them are, but certainly there is no background of support, of acquiescence, of compromise with the state of Israel. So we have to suspect that they may become more extreme and maybe violent force that will be taking over Syria, and we have to be quite aware of it, quite careful, and watch it very carefully.
There is a lot of speculation, though, that the leader of the group, Ahmed al-Shara, or Abu Muhammad al-Jawlani, as he's also known, is trying to distance himself a little bit from that movement with a connection, at least, with ISIS and Al-Qaeda, and trying to win more approval from the international community so that he can be more like a government leader. And there is that strong feeling that perhaps there is a change in the way they might move forward.
Well, certainly we have to hope so, but I think we have to remain very careful. And look, at the present time, no one knows who is al-Jawlani, and therefore there is not any immediate reaction by the traditional enemies of Israel, including the Iranians, that were tied up so much with Bashar al-Assad in his favor. So I think that what shows that he is smart is the fact that he is not rushing for any statements that might jeopardize the very initial hold that he has in Syria. But what will happen later, how he will build up his political power in Syria, and who will be the potential allies of a government, if he will form a government, remains to be seen. It's a very preliminary stage. And the experience in the Middle East proves that you have to be suspicious, you have to be careful, and don't rush for judgment either way. And don't do anything that will force him or squeeze him into a corner which will leave him with no alternative but to become an enemy of yours. If there is a chance that he will not, we certainly have to watch it carefully and see if it can somehow develop in a positive direction.
Now, as everyone knows, Mr. Olmert, the Assad regime was in power for over half a century. And there has been some analysis, I would love to get your perspective on this, that Israel largely accepted the Assad regime in power because it was better to have the devil you know than the one you might not know. I'd love to get your perspective on that.
Well, this is one of those sayings that, I sometimes say, I'd rather say that Assad was a dangerous enemy. I mean, mostly his father, but he also, the fact is that he was building an atomic reactor in Syria, which I had to order the Israeli army to destroy. But the fact that he was even contemplating a possession of nuclear power in Syria shows that he was dangerous, and he had to be taken care of very carefully, and as we did. But and also the fact is that he has aligned himself with Iran, and he allowed the Iranian forces to take important position inside Syria, which was an immediate threat to the security of the State of Israel. So he was not a friend, and he was dangerous, and there was a good reason for Israel to be apprehensive about him. But look, if at the end of the day, Iran, the ISIS forces will grow, expand rapidly, and take over and become very extreme and very violent and very provocative, as they threatened to be in the past, then definitely we'll be able to say, rather than have them, we should have stayed with Bashar Assad. But I think everything is too early. I'm not sorry to have lost the neighborhood of Bashar Assad, but I'm at the same time, I'm not extremely happy thinking about who potentially may take over.
As you indicated, Mr. Olmert, Israel is concerned about the risk of any weapons that Syria possesses falling into the wrong hands or falling into the extremists' hands, as Prime Minister Netanyahu has said. So Israel has taken action, of course, bombing military sites and so on, and also mobilizing troops into the Golan Heights. Isn't there the risk, though, that by bombing military sites in Syria, that Israel is damaging the new government's ability to maintain control and security within its borders?
No, I don't think so. Why should they? Where is the potential border risk to the border of Syria? Maybe I think we don't have to allow the new forces to become the controllers of the infrastructure or the military infrastructure, which has been part of the Syrian power for a very long time. So I think it's a good idea that as much as we can destroy the infrastructure, the research institutes where they were manufacturing missiles, long-range missiles, and other weapons, and the facilities where they were trying to build non-conventional weapons, chemical weapons, all these rather disappear as soon as possible. And there will not, we don't destroy, I believe so. I don't actually know everything, but I believe that we don't destroy the economic infrastructure of Syria. We don't destroy manufacturing facilities which are important for the economy of Syria. So that leaves the new leaders with enough basis to build up their hold in Syria and to contribute to the welfare of the states without the unnecessary military power base which Bashar al-Assad had for a long time.
So how do you see the balance of power in the region shifting as a result of the removal of the al-Assad regime?
Well, potentially I can say that the power of the more moderate forces, including, of course, Israel and the other moderate countries, the Arabs, has definitely been improved. I think it still remains to be seen what is exactly the game that Turkey is playing. I must say, I don't know. On the one hand, one shouldn't forget that Turkey is part of NATO. So there are certain restrictions and limitations to the ability of Turkey to use or to move all kinds of military actions, which may not necessarily be acceptable to the alliance that Turkey is part of. On the other hand, it's obvious that Turkey probably triggered some of the operations and supported, directly or indirectly, the al-Jolani. So it remains to be seen where is Turkey in this game. Turkey is, as far as Israel is concerned, of course, is a source of some concern. We'll have to look at it.
We'll be looking at that on this show as well. So now, just with about 2 minutes left, I'm curious, considering what's going on in Israel right now with Benjamin Netanyahu going into court to appear on corruption charges, would you be comfortable commenting on that? I know you went through this, you denied all the accusations against you, but would you be comfortable commenting on what's going on with Mr. Netanyahu right now?
To tell you the truth, this is a legal process. What I was absolutely unhappy with was the fact that Netanyahu was using every possible manipulation, the power of his position, the power of the government in order to try and prevent a due legal process. But and I think it's very important for the stability of the system in Israel and the nature of the Israeli democracy that it's taking place. What will be the outcome of this, I think, remains to be seen. I don't know. I have no idea. I'm not familiar with the specifics of the accusations. It smells. It sounds bad. It looks bad. The efforts that they were making in order to prevent his appearance in court almost speaks for itself. But we have to trust the legal system and let it works. And hopefully the truth will come through.
We've got, of course, a very divided country in Israel with people very much split on the whole perception of Benjamin Netanyahu. What impact would that have on the court proceedings, do you think?
Look, the fact is that all the polls which were run in Israel over the last couple of years, particularly this last year, there was consistently a majority of people saying they don't trust Netanyahu and they don't trust that in the course of the war on matters of the utmost sensitivity and importance for the national security of the state of Israel, that Netanyahu preferred there was a charge that he preferred his personal interest over the national interest of the state of Israel. And I think that the whole events now concerning his appearance in court and the efforts and the pressure that he was using against the legal system, the threats against the Attorney General, all this is somehow mixed up with the needs to take decisions about the ending of war. And therefore, I think that this is certainly contributing to the polarization which is going up in the state of Israel and the expectation that somehow the legal process will bring about the collapse of the government.
Ehud Olmert, thank you very much. We're out of time, but thank you for your perspective. I look forward to speaking with you again. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much.
Well, what should we expect to see from a new government in Syria? Well, certainly the participation of the militia alliance Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, known as HTS, and Military Operations Administration, led by Ahmed al-Sharaa. For an understanding of the key groups who will be hoping to have a say in Syria's future, I'm joined by Aaron Weizelin, a senior fellow at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy. Aaron, thank you very much for joining the show. Let me start by asking, how would you sum up the risks and the opportunities presented by the fall of the al-Assad government?
I think there's a lot of potential trajectories that could go. We could also see different events occurring more in the western part of the country than, say, in the eastern part of the country. For now, at least in the east, we've seen that there's more fighting between the Syrian National Army backed by Turkey against the U.S.-backed Syrian Democratic Forces, and that could lead to potential destabilization. Important to remember that the Islamic State remains an insurgency in the east, as well as all the prisoners there. But in the western part of the country, in Damascus, we're seeing that HTS is already beginning to start its transitionary period in relation to meeting with former regime officials, handing it over to HTS's civilian government, the Salvation Government, and them announcing today that there will be a transition period now up until March 1st.
And Aaron, it seems that HTS is looking to be a little more governmental in its nature. What should we know about that opposition group, HTS, and its leader, Ahmed al-Sharaa, also known as Abu Muhammad al-Jolani, in the potential new administration roles?
Yeah, so we have like a 7-year plus track record of now HTS governing through its civilian technocratic apparatus called the Syrian Salvation Government. Jolani himself has had no official role within this government. So he's essentially like an unelected official that still makes the final decisions on many things. That being said, the Salvation Government has a series of ministries like any other government. It has the Majlis al-Shura, this consultative council. It's essentially, selected by a coterie of elite men within the society, and then they kind of decide on who the ministers are. And they've been governing like most any other governments, obviously with the certain limitations of not being an official government, recognized, as well as the fact that 3/4 of its population has been displaced people. So the UN has had a large role in assisting in the IDP camps. But, one of the things that they have been doing is building up these institutions, learning from lessons of crises such as COVID-19 or the earthquake in February 2023. And we've seen that at least during the offensive, before they took Damascus, that they were starting to implement the same governance structures in Aleppo as well. And therefore, I imagine that we'll see them trying to carbon copy this now in Damascus and elsewhere in the country.
I guess it should be noted, Aaron, that the group is considered a terrorist organization by the UN, Turkey, and many Western countries, many of whom have refugees wishing to return. Do you expect that status to change?
I think that it depends on the particular country. I don't think that there will be straight across the board same answer to it. I think that of all the countries that it might happen quickest, it might be Turkey. I think then some European countries, UK, might take some time, might want to, get something out of what's going on. But I think the United States in many ways will be the most strident, just because of their past being part of the Islamic State and Al-Qaeda previously, as well as the fact that Jawlani was involved in war crimes, both in Iraq before he was the leader of Jabhat al-Nusra, the predecessor to HTS, as well as within Syria itself. So I think it'll be different for all the different countries trying to potentially engage with this new government.
Well, of course, HTS is the main name being bandied around, but which are the other groups vying for influence in the future of Syria?
So we have HTS, which took over Damascus more or less. You have the remnants of the old insurgency in the south, though it seems that they more or less will be letting HTS play the role, since even though the southern offensive was the first ones to get to Damascus, HTS is now beginning the transition. But then you have the Turkish-backed SNA, which continues to fight the Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Forces. But the thing with those two groups is that the SNA's main focus, because it is a Turkish proxy, is making sure that the Kurds are cut down to size more or less, and don't have any potential influence going forward. And then, of course, because they're a minority in the country, while the SDF has a role to play, they wouldn't be ones that would be necessarily controlling the country. The question is what kind of deal they might get with HTS and how that would be integrated into the broader country. And then there are also questions related to the remnants of the old regime and how that all factors in. Thus far, there's been a peaceful transition. One of the biggest questions is if there might be some extremist elements from the old regime and the Alawite community that decide that maybe they're not happy with any new arrangements and therefore start an insurgency of their own. But that is yet to bear out, but it's something to potentially watch for in the more medium term.
We have an interesting situation in that Turkey and the US, both of which are NATO members, support different groups in Syria. How do you expect that to be resolved by the incoming President Donald Trump?
Well, it's been an issue between the two countries going back a decade ago, since the U.S. essentially backed the SDF in its fight against the Islamic State. It's important to remember that the only reason that the U.S. is backing the SDF is because of the global coalition's fight to take territory from the Islamic State and to make sure that it doesn't come back. And there have definitely been some uncomfortable conversations between Turkish and American officials going back a decade or so related to this, because it's important to remember that a core part of the SDF is the YPG, which is essentially the Syrian branch of the PKK, which is a designated terrorist group, not only by Turkey, but also by the United States. So it's a complicated problem. At the same time, I don't think anybody wants to see ethnic cleansing against the Kurds going forward. And the SDF has been controlling the prisons and IDP camps of the remnants of the Islamic State. So there are 10,000 male prisoners from the Islamic State that the SDF is holding, as well as tens of thousands of women and children related to the Islamic State still in its territory in northeast Syria. And of course, I don't think anybody wants to see that destabilized. Otherwise, you could kind of see the reemergence of the Islamic State, which of course the United States doesn't want.
Israel has been conducting airstrikes to take out the chance of weapons being used against it by extreme anti-Israeli groups. Now, what actual danger is there of that possibility?
I think in the near term, there's not a ton of danger related to it. It's more mitigating potential future risks. I think from a pragmatic level, HTS doesn't want to start a fight with Israel right now. Israel's kind of shown in the last year plus post the 10/7 attack in their response that, it'd be a bit suicidal for HTS to start something right now. But I think Israel understands that given time from these past events, as well as space for HTS to potentially consolidate control, that maybe in 5 to 10 years, it could be an issue. And therefore, they're trying to get ahead of it. And because they have the freedom of movement now as a consequence of everything they've done over the last year or so, they're taking advantage of the situation to benefit their own security on the border.
Aaron, how is the balance of power, or how is the balance of power likely to change now in the region with regard to Israel and Iran?
Well, it's definitely been a big blow to Iran, not only in relation to Israel's response to the 10/7 attack and taking out a lot of Hamas's infrastructure, but also Hezbollah's infrastructure in Lebanon. And now with the falling of the Assad regime, this key cog between Tehran to Beirut has been stopped, and it will be a bit more difficult now for Iran to try and resupply and rebuild Hezbollah's capabilities in the aftermath of this alleged ceasefire between Israel and Hezbollah. And therefore, the two countries in the region, at least, that have benefited the most geopolitically speaking are probably first Turkey and then second, possibly Israel.
Well, when we talk about balance of power, what about further afield, like Russia, for example?
Yeah, in terms of Russia, I think it's one of the more complicated questions. I think that they're relatively pragmatic. We've seen them obviously engage with the Taliban since the fall of Kabul 3+ years ago. And in many ways, I think they might look at HTS as a similar model, and therefore a country that, or a new government that they could potentially work with if they're being pragmatic to retain their interests. They want to, of course, keep a warm water port in the Mediterranean to help with all of their operations in Africa, as well as potentially harassing Europeans as well. And therefore, one of the interesting things we saw in the lead up to the offensive against the regime was that HTS put out a number of statements following November 27th, essentially saying that, while we don't agree with you doing all these airstrikes against us in the offensive, our fight really is against the regime, Iran and its Shia militia, and that we could potentially have fruitful relationships going forward if you essentially ditch the regime. And of course, we will safeguard your consular services in Aleppo, as well as any diplomatic facilities in Damascus, as well as any remaining Russian citizens that have been living in Syria. So there's clearly been some potential back channeling going on between Russia and HTS and what that could mean going forward. And at least thus far, Russia's been able to maintain its ability to have its different bases on the coast in Syria and see how that potentially plays out vis-a-vis the development of these relationships.
Well, certainly as far as the al-Assad regime, it seems that Russia and Iran were quite absent in recent times.
Yeah, I mean, part of it is that the regime really was hollowed out by a decade ago, and the Russians and Iran saved them. And yet, at the same time, over this past decade, we haven't really seen the regime build up stronger institutions, make reforms so that it would be more robust and more flexible. And in fact, it's become weaker in some ways, especially considering the fact that the economy has been torn to shreds because of the economic crisis next door in Lebanon, where Syria is using a lot of its banks to continue to try and be connected to the international system, and thus creating way more inflation in the country. And because of that, due to them not necessarily reforming internally, even though the Russians and Iranians backed the regime, there were a lot of arguments. And by the time of this offensive, and the fact that it happened so quickly, and the fact that maybe there wasn't enough time to pull off a counteroffensive, both decided that we're just going to pull the cord on this and try and regroup.
Well, as happens in quite often in the region, factions are vying for power. So what are the chances of all these groups collaborating successfully to hold elections and rebuild Syria?
I mean, it's one of the biggest questions going forward. I don't know if necessarily we'll see elections in the way that one might conceive of it in the Western context. Based off of what I know, and if past is precedent, HTS will conduct sort of internal elections amongst elite males for positions within its Majlis al-Shura, the consultative council. And then from there, a prime minister will be selected, and the prime minister will essentially decide on ministers, and the Majlis al-Shura will essentially stamp the ministers. So it wouldn't necessarily be a broad process where every Syrian would have a say in these elections, but it would likely be notables and key elites within the society that would be deciding it, at least if the model in Idlib is put upon the rest of the country. The biggest question is how scalable this model is to the rest of the country, whether they'll pivot more and become a bit more open in their system than it was in Idlib, and also how they might integrate other factions into it. And I think a lot of there's a greater chance for the potential that the SDF and HTS can cut a deal, since they aren't necessarily enemies with one another. It might be a bit more difficult with the Turkish-backed SNA because they themselves have not been really governing directly, and also have not really been focused on building a country in the same way that both HTS and the SDF have been doing in their own spheres of influence. So that might be the toughest nut to crack related to it, especially since Turkey might want to use the SNA as a card to play for more influence in the new Syria.
Well, Aaron, as a final thought, with all these factions involved inside and outside the country, how likely is the alternative scenario of another civil war in Syria?
It's really hard to say. I can see a number of potential scenarios. It's definitely possible that we might see more continued fighting more in the northeast and eastern part of the country because of the SNA and the SDF, as well as the remnant Islamic State insurgency. But I suspect that things will be relatively stable in more of the western part of the country where HTS controls. And the biggest question is how HTS can reconcile its new polity and its building up of it with the eastern part of the country.
Aaron Zellin, thank you very much for giving us your analysis on the situation there.
Thanks for having me.
It's estimated that more than 700 journalists have been killed in Syria since 2011. So imagine you're a Syrian journalist in Damascus on the day opposition forces reach the capital and the president of a despised regime flees the country. Well, that's the situation my final guest found himself in this week. Danny Mackey managed to work around power cuts and a curfew to describe the experience. Danny Mackey, thanks for making the time, especially considering the turbulent circumstances. Let's start by getting an idea of when you knew something major was happening in the country.
Well, really, when the fall of Aleppo happened, we got a big idea that something really serious was happening. We could see that an entire province falling would lead to a number of different problems in other provinces. We saw the Syrian army fled. And Assad lost basically Aleppo, Hama, Idlib, Daraa, and Suwaida in the space of around 5 days. I mean, to lose 5 of your most important provinces in 5 days is really unprecedented. That's when we kind of knew that, okay, this is heading towards Damascus. Even though Damascus and Homs fell the same evening, we expected there to be more resistance. We expected there to be a bit of a fight. But no, it was just abandoned. Syrian army just abandoned its positions. They abandoned the capital city and basically just fled for their lives. And that's something which has been a reoccurring feature over the last 2 weeks, is Syrian army just abandoning its positions.
And when did you first get a sense that the opposition forces, the Military Operations Administration, as it's called, first arrived into Damascus?
We got a sense when we heard the gunfire in the capital, and we heard that they'd arrived at the broadcasting center in Umayyad Square. Now, when they got to this center, and it was really, the old school traditional head for the media building kind of coup, when they arrived there, they actually issued a statement saying, on Syrian television, saying the regime had actually collapsed. And that was really fitting for a 60-year-old regime, that it would be done in that kind of way. Also, we heard a number of clashes. We heard reports. We could see that they were massing around the edges of the capital. And when you've lost most of Damascus countryside and they've actually infiltrated the center, you could see things had come to an end. But you didn't see any heavy weapons. What we saw at the start was just militants carrying AK-47s, maximum having a couple of RPGs. We didn't see any really heavy weapons, which suggests that there wasn't a fight at all.
What's been the mood of the people on the street? Of course, we've heard reports of all the celebrations supporting the downfall of Bashar Assad. Are there any voices in support of him?
Well, absolutely not. I think Assad is, dead and buried when it comes to Syria. Even his main coastal kind of support base has pretty much abandoned him. And, why wouldn't they? This was an individual who said that, he would live, he was born in Syria and he would die in Syria. And, when push came to shove, he just upped and left the country, and he left his own security detail behind. He didn't even take them with him, which shows you, there were also reports that he emptied out the Syrian central bank. So this individual clearly had no concern for anything but his own interests. And him going to Russia, applying for refugee status at the end is, really fitting end to someone who has created so many refugees himself.
One of the big stories coming out is how many people have been freed from the prisons.
A number of different people, thousands, and all across Syria, tens of thousands have been released from the prisons, from Adra to Saydnaya to Aleppo, Hama. And many of these people really did nothing wrong, but maybe say a couple of words against the regime, maybe have some sort of, a couple of issues behind them. And some of these people stayed there for decades, especially the political prisoners. There were people who'd been in there since the start of the crisis. And, the Assad regime's prisons were really, slaughterhouses. So many of these locations, to actually find, hundreds of individuals was really a blessing that you could actually see them, because for the Assad regime, this was a place where people came to die. I mean, no one went into Syrian prisons to actually come out.
We heard reports that there were actually people, a large number of people, who were scheduled to be executed on the day the regime fell. It seems they basically got a last-minute reprieve.
Yeah, I mean, for them, it was definitely a miracle. And for the rest of Syria, it's been a miracle as well, because the rest of Syria was probably expected to perish within a couple of days because of the situation in the country. I mean, and when I mean that, I mean the economic situation in the country, which you have an absolutely wrecked financial system. You have a country which, everything's getting more expensive. The salaries keep getting even lower. And, when speaking from an economic sense, an entire population was struggling, to really meet any sort of need. So this was something which the Syrians needed change. They got the change they needed. And going forward, they're going to have to handle how to challenge the many issues which are going to come towards them in the future, which will be substantial and which need many sensible heads.
And there are still reports of many people being held in secret prisons underground, in bunkers, and through a tunnel network. And I guess the priority is to get to them too.
Well, clearly more effort has gone into the Syrian prison system than has gone into the actual air defense system in Syria or any of the systems in the country. And I'm sure if Assad would have put all of that money into his technological capabilities, then he probably wouldn't have collapsed in that way. But what I would definitely say is, these places were not places where you'd hold one or two people. They were places where you would hold tens of thousands of people, in a very systematic, comprehensive manner, where you'd probably keep them there for decades on end. So what we've seen from Saydnaya, especially people coming out, we've seen, women living with children, not knowing who the fathers of the children are. We've seen horrific stories. And for anyone who's actually watching, there are many people in Syria who lived under the government, who are actually supportive of the government for a period. But for many of those people, you could never speak about Saydnaya because it would earn you a one-way trip to Saydnaya itself. But looking at it now, there was nothing that most people could have done here. And in the end of the day, watching this as a Syrian, it just makes you feel that you never want to see anything similar to this happen in the country ever again.
Now, you were talking about the situation there. Of course, after the downfall of a long-reigning regime, there can often be chaos and looting and trouble on the streets. Have you seen any signs of that?
Well, so far, we've seen some counts of looting, especially on the first couple of days in areas, what I've seen around western Damascus. There were some in the east of Damascus as well. And this was mainly, kiosks, specific areas, certain government institutions. I mean, the presidential palace was looted on a number of occasions by a number of different people. I mean, you had droves of just civilians going into areas, taking out, Assad's suitcases, tables, chairs, all sorts of, anything in the palace was basically looted in the hours after the actual fall and collapse of Damascus. So we've seen that's been a widespread factor that we've seen lots of.
What's the security situation like right now? Is the public safe?
The people are generally safe. I mean, there's no clashes or any differences now on the streets, but what we are seeing is a lot of gunfire happening. Some people in Damascus, there's a curfew which starts at 4 o'clock and finishes at 5 in the morning. Also, you'd probably add that most people are still a bit concerned. They haven't all came back to their jobs, to the streets. You know, it's a bit of a difficult situation until most families are going to give it, you know, at least 48 hours, you know, give it a couple of days until they start going back to their daily lives, because, you know, a lot of people don't know what to expect. It's still a very fresh kind of thing. And whenever you have a power vacuum after a regime which has been here for 60 years, you know, a lot of different things are bound to happen. There's going to be a bit of a period of instability, especially for the first couple of days. I mean, the Assads have let no one in for the last 60 years. So, you know, it's about time that there's a bit of a change, and that change is going to have, you know, sacrifices. And the sacrifice for the immediate future is, you know, the immediate security situation. That will improve definitely with time.
Now, you touched on the economic situation and how bad things have been. What's the situation going forward?
Well, definitely the rebuilding process will take a lot of time, and it needs a lot of sacrifices from regional countries, especially to help Syria economically. Sanctions need to be lifted, and Syrians themselves need to really learn how to mobilize and organize themselves in a way which rebuilds the country successfully. But definitely any economic improvement would start by getting the state institutions back online, because for now there's no electricity in the country. You know, all of the shops are really not really open again. So that's something which will have to be dealt with in the immediate future.
Now, there are reports, and we've seen pictures of large numbers of Syrians crossing the border. They're coming back into Syria from Lebanon. They're coming in from Jordan. But it seems that there are some leaving as well. What do you know about that?
Well, a lot of people are returning to the country because it's now safe again. I mean, you don't have the Assad regime. Most of these people's main issues was with the Syrian Mukhabarat or the Syrian state security or the Syrian president himself. So a lot of these people can actually technically come back into Syria and go to Damascus and go to Aleppo and celebrate with their Syrian brothers and sisters that the country's been liberated.
But what do they have to look forward to? Many of them are going to have to essentially rebuild their homes after decades outside the country.
Well, they have to look forward to ultimately not being, you know, persecuted, not being sent to jail, not being, you know, arrested by the Mukhabarat as soon as they enter the country. They have to look forward to is building a new Syria, and this, you know, these events are really a new dawn for the country. So ultimately, they have many things to look forward to, many beautiful things. You know, reviving the country, its cultural side, helping improve the economy, and, you know, bringing a lot of stability to Syria again.
Those remaining from the Assad government have said that there will be a smooth transition. What do we know about Ahmed al-Shara, also known as Abu Muhammad al-Jilani, who heads the military operations administration that is now in control?
But definitely, he seems like he's going to be the new Minister of Defense in Syria. And he's gone from someone who was deeply unpopular in the country to someone with a lot of popularity in a very short space of time. So it may be a bit concerning for some of the minorities in the country. But so far, the activities and the behavior of Hayat Tahrir al-Sham has not really given any indications that there's going to be anything negative. So potentially speaking, things look like they're going to be in a good order going forward without any specific, you know, religious restrictions. And it seems like, especially Jilani himself, they've given us an important blueprint by their activities in Aleppo.
Well, what is the situation for the Alawites now that Bashar Assad has gone?
I mean, I've seen many statements by Hayat Tahrir al-Sham and by the rebel forces suggesting that no minorities are going to be persecuted and telling them essentially to continue their lives as it was. So I could not actually say that anything will change. We've seen no evidence of this kind of persecution so far. And I'm sure if there is, people will write about it and talk about it. But for now, it seems that things are going in a positive direction.
You talked about the police and army dropping their uniforms and going into civilian clothing. What is the role of the police and the army right now? Are they even trusted?
There is no police and army at the moment. And that's the main point. I mean, you're really going to have to build a police force to build an army again with the new transitional government. And that's something which will ultimately take time. And you're going to need individuals who have history in the country to really come together and help out with that, because you need civil servants in state institutions. And that's something where you're going to have to use people who were previously in the old regime who can help keep this machine ticking, but in a positive way, so that electricity comes, so that things become, open again, so that people have confidence again.
Now, Danny, I know you specialized in Syria's relationship with Iran and with Russia, and it seems that Iran and Russia were not around much as Bashar Assad's regime was falling. Presumably, they're preoccupied with their own other issues. But what is the situation with those countries going to be like now going forward?
Well, both of them have actually issued statements saying they respect the will of the Syrian people, and the authorities here have actually issued a number of statements saying that nothing will change and that they will continue to support any relations with external factors, including Russia and Iran. So this was basically been, Assad's kind of death sentence politically was, the fact that Russia and Iran didn't come back into the fold, and the fact that the opposition have reached kind of out to the Iranians and the Russians saying, look, we want relations in the future. Let's see where this goes.
Now, the fall of the Assad regime was very fast, as the world has witnessed. How long will it take for Syria to come back together again and for the people to unite?
Well, this will take a number of years. It's not going to happen overnight. And as long as the Syrian people remain on, then ultimately they will get there in the end, everyone working together.
Oh, Danny, I think we've lost you there. Are you okay?
I'm literally going to have to go.
No, totally understood. You stay safe, Danny, and thank you for making the time. Well, it's a shame we had to cut short our conversation with Danny Mackie, who's there in Damascus, witnessing and documenting firsthand the dramatic changes in Syria. But we'll no doubt have a chance to reconnect with him at some point as this story continues to develop. And that's it for this episode of the show. I'm Riz Khan. From me and the team, thanks for watching. We'll see you soon.
At Arabiya News, we go beyond the headlines.
From the latest breaking news to in-depth coverage of global events.
We're not bought or sold. Nobody owns us.
The loss of life, the destruction of property. The conflicts are such a terrible thing.
Context and analysis to help you see the full picture.
The world is in a very dangerous place.
Join us on Arabiya News,
It's very impressive.
where knowledge meets perspective.
Hello and welcome to Global News Today, bringing you exclusive insights and fresh perspectives from leading experts and influential decision makers every weekday here on Arabiya News. I'm Tom Burges Watson. Coming up on today's programme, fresh heated debate across the world as the US President-elect Donald Trump repeats his ambition to purchase Greenland. But the Prime Minister of Greenland says the country isn't for sale and never will be. President-elect Trump refuses to rule out using military force to retake the Panama Canal, which was returned to the United States to that country's control several decades ago. The mother of the former leader of the Proud Boys speaks to Al Arabiya News, hopeful that the US President-elect Donald Trump will keep his word and pardon the January 6th convicts. And the air is thick with smoke and the skies above Los Angeles have turned red from wildfires. These massive blazes have forced more than 30,000 people to evacuate their homes. Hello and welcome to the programme. Greenland's leader is set to hold talks today with the King of Denmark. Well, their talks in Copenhagen follow on from statements from the US President-elect Donald Trump, who says he wants to take control of the vast Arctic island of Greenland. Well, Greenland is an autonomous territory of Denmark. Well, Trump's comments have sparked alarm and prompted France's Foreign Minister Jean-Noël Barratt to say that the European Union will not let other nations attack its sovereign borders. Well, NATO has not yet commented on Trump's plan to take over Greenland. But Trump's eldest son, Donald Trump Jr., is currently on a private visit to Greenland. Well, a tug-of-war is now playing out between Denmark and the incoming US President Donald Trump. Well, on the arrival of Trump Jr., the Danish king changed the royal coat of arms to prominently feature symbols from Greenland and the Faroe Islands. Well, historians say the stance by King Frederick is a clear message that he wants to retain Greenland. Well, Trump first said he wanted to buy Greenland back in 2019 during his first term as president. That was an offer that was quickly rejected by both Greenland and Denmark. Well, on the streets of Copenhagen, residents seemed rather puzzled by Donald Trump's plans.
Well, I think it's a strange thing to do. I think it's a strange thing to threaten our allied countries, and I don't understand what he is doing, quite honestly.
Extremely ridiculous. Like, if he wanted something from Greenland, or we have an alliance, we are allies. So this doesn't really respect that.
Apparently he says everything, and you have to stay strong and not to be too much affected by what he's saying. You just try to ignore it.
Okay, residents there in Copenhagen. Well, Aya Shemnitz is a lawmaker who represents Greenland in the Danish parliament. They've been reacting on Facebook, slamming Donald Trump's plan, saying, quote, "It is unbelievable that some people can be so naive as to believe that our happiness lies in us becoming American citizens." So what does the future hold for Greenland? Well, to find out, we're joined now by Kuno Fenker, who is a member of Parliament for Greenland. We're also joined by Greg Swenson, who's chair of the Republicans Overseas UK. Great to have you both with us, gentlemen. Let me turn to you, first of all, Kuno. Does Greenland want to be absorbed into the United States?
No, but we want to cooperate with the United States closer, and what is non-negotiable here is that Greenland wants to become a sovereign state, member of the UN and other international organizations. But we are fully aware that we need to cooperate with a bigger state. It could be Denmark. We have talked with Denmark in regards to a more equal cooperation, but it seems to not go that way. And we are, in a way, thankful of Donald Trump's connection to Greenland and his communication in regards to Greenland. And he wants to protect the Arctic and the world for security. And that is some positive things that we hear. The only thing that we don't want in Greenland is that we don't want to be owned by any other state. Denmark annexed us in 1953, and we don't want to be annexed again. So we want a free and democratic referendum for Greenland's independence and statehood, but we are not naive, and we, of course, need to cooperate with the United States and Denmark and even other allies.
Okay, Greg, let me turn to you. We've just heard it there. An MP from Greenland saying doesn't want his country to be annexed again. Donald Trump might go ahead and annex Greenland anyway, mightn't he?
Yeah, I'm not sure about annexing Greenland, but I think he's looking to perhaps end up in much more of a strategic relationship with Greenland. And we already have, the U.S. already has an Air Force base there. And so I think there's some merit to that extra cooperation. So I thought your guest, I won't try to butcher your name, I apologize, but was, that his response, his answer was really measured. Of course, people want to be independent. I'm not sure that Greenland can survive without subsidies from Denmark or from the U.S. if it were to be part of the U.S. So, but I'm really glad that there is that measured response and that there's some understanding that, how valuable Greenland is as far as defense and security goes. Again, we have a base there already. It's really critical for communications and satellite connectivity, as well as the fact that there's critical minerals underground, which I think would be better exploited, to use it's a funny word to use, but I do think that critical minerals are really important given the dependence on China for so much of that. So I think it would be important for some sort of strategic relationship between the U.S. and Greenland to basically exploit the minerals that are needed for defense. I think it would be good for the West. I think it would be good for NATO, and it would be good for Greenland.
Kuno, let me turn back to you. What we've basically been hearing from you as well in the first answer was that Greenland, a country of 57,000 people, a very small population, but a vast territorial space on the planet, is basically in a tug of war here. It's got to choose between being in the orbit of Copenhagen or in the orbit of of Washington. Does that roughly sum it up?
Not necessarily, but we can make a double compact of free association with Denmark and the US, where the US has more control in regards to the defense and security of Greenland, and we can cooperate with Denmark in some other instances. And the political organization can be made in many different ways. And I also agree with the other guy on the line here. I don't remember his name. But
his name's Greg.
We have to cooperate.
Greg, meet Kuno. Kuno, meet Greg.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Kuno.
Yeah, we have to cooperate in regards to the economy, and critical minerals are of utmost importance. We have vast energy from hydropower. We have possibilities in regards to oil and gas exploration and liquid gas, and if that is necessary for the security of our allies here in the West and NATO. So we also want to cooperate in regards to tourism, fisheries, and other kinds of businesses that can make our economy more sustainable and self-sufficient for Greenland, instead of the what you call the subsidy from Denmark. It's actually a contractual agreement that Denmark pays us around 4 billion Danish kroner a year. And I don't see it as a block grant as such. So it's a sort of a payment that they have a big area for sovereignty and maybe a saying in the Arctic, as a very small country Denmark is.
Yeah, I mean, your Prime Minister, Mette Egede, and maybe you can correct me on my pronunciation when you give your answer there. He said before Christmas, Greenland is ours, we're not for sale, we never will be for sale. I mean, supposing the price was right, I mean, 57,000 people live in Greenland. If a really large sum of money was put on the table, it'd be quite difficult, wouldn't it, for people to refuse?
No, it's a way of the past, and no states are for sale now, and I think it's a way of saying it. So Trump is usually saying that Denmark owns Greenland, and basically they have the sovereignty of Greenland. So we can say that Denmark owns us, but and we are already getting a payment from the so-called block grant. But we are not for sale, and that's for sure. And our striving for and ambitious for creating the state of Greenland as a sovereign state is non-negotiable. But we are absolutely willing to cooperate in other kinds of political, organizational solutions.
And I just want to ask you as well, staying with you, Kuno, and we will come back to you, Greg, in just a moment, but I just want to ask you, I mean, before we cross to you both, we heard from the lawmaker who represents Greenland in the Danish parliament, saying it's unbelievable some people can be so naive as to believe that our happiness lies in us becoming American citizens. Kuno, do you want to become an American citizen?
No, but I will say that the way of communicating that is disinformation. It's trying to create tensions between allies and friends. So I would just say that, of course, we don't want to become citizens of other states. We are already citizens of Denmark that annexed us in 1953, and we don't want to have that. We want our own citizenship here in Greenland. That's why we want to become a sovereign state, but we are absolutely willing to cooperate in a compact of free association or any other means of democratic ways.
Greg, let me come back to you. Donald Trump saying he's not ruling out the idea of using military force if it comes to that to take control of Greenland. I mean, what's he getting at here?
Yeah, I think that might be, to a certain degree, trolling or just trying to throw a grenade in the room. This is something that he's done in the past, and they had conversations back in 2019 with the Danish government. So, look, President Trump has a different way, an unfiltered way of communicating, and sometimes ends up in the right place after some negotiation or after a bit of drama. So I wouldn't get too worried about, this idea. I heard the earlier guest talk about, threats to your allies. Now, these are not threats to the allies. I mean, Look, I think Kuno makes some really great points that, a strategic relationship would be really positive for Greenland, really positive for the West, and positive for the U.S. So if that's the way that, President Trump likes to communicate, it's some people find it a little aggressive. Some people find that unfiltered nature, kind of refreshing, but it's not for everyone. But it's the outcome that's the most important thing. And if we can see an outcome where, and Kuno's comments were very American in the spirit, that they want to be independent. And I think if there is an independent Greenland, they will get fantastic cooperation from the U.S. or from the Trump administration, and really it'll be win-win. Kuno's right. There's strategic minerals. There's oil and gas. It's a really important country geopolitically and obviously geographically. So I think the outcome of this conversation will be great. I just don't know. I can't promise you how we'll get there.
Yeah, but I mean, when we hear Donald Trump saying, I refuse to rule out using military action to take control of Greenland, I mean, that's hostile. It's provocative, and it's sent. Yeah, it's triggered alarm.
Yeah, he's a very provocative president, and I think that this, and sometimes it becomes a distraction. Back when John Bolton was National Security Advisor and was reaching out to the Danish government, it was initially done through back channels, and many of us prefer that, but I do understand that President Trump's nature is to be provocative. And so that's just, I think, something that we got used to in the first term. Most importantly for President Trump and the new administration are the outcomes. And I think you'll see great outcomes from him.
Let me turn back to you, Kuno. The King of Denmark is meeting your Prime Minister today. I assume they're talking about this very subject. What do you think they're talking about?
Well, first of all, we haven't elected the King of Denmark, and he's not elected. So, and we haven't even elected the Prime Minister of Denmark or the Foreign Minister of Denmark. So that's why the organization of the so-called Danish realm is non-democratic. So that's why we want independence, because Denmark doesn't listen to us. And I also agree very much with Greg in regards to how we should interpret Trump's communication about Greenland. And I don't interpret his remarks as a threat of military force against Greenland or Denmark, but he's seeing that with the geopolitical tensions we have in the world right now and the melting ice, we have to protect this island for the security of the North American continent, which is Greenland, Canada, and the US. And he's absolutely right in regards to the free passage of Chinese vessels, Russian vessels, or any other kinds of vessels that are coming through our waters here in Greenland. We have to have the right surveillance of those. But the only thing that we might disagree on is that, we are not for sale, and the future lies in partnerships based on mutual respect and not what you call unilateral actions, if you can say that.
Okay, so when you hear, for example, Kuno, the King of Denmark has changed the royal coat of arms to make it a little bit more reflective of Greenland and the Faroe Islands, how does that make you feel?
Well, in a way, I don't really care who is the head of state of Greenland. We just want to become a sovereign state. And, the UK has, like Canada and Australia, where the head of state is the King of England. Well, they don't have a direct saying in our politics. And that could also be fine with me. But the main goal is that we want a sovereign state of Greenland, where the Greenlandic people decide on what kind of state and what kind of democracy that we want to be.
Let me turn back to you, Greg. I mean, do you think, that we have heard some hostile rhetoric from the incoming Trump administration, Canada, Panama, Greenland. These are all countries that are starting to wonder what their future is, what the future holds for them. I mean, what sort of a message do you think this sends out to the rest of the world? And, does it not perhaps give carte blanche to other leaders to start eyeing up bits of territory that they might like the look of in their backyards?
Yeah, I think, and unfortunately, we've seen some of that in the last 4 years, and I don't think there's any reason to advocate that. I think what President Trump is doing is being provocative. It's a word we've used a few times today, but also, this goes back in history to the Monroe Doctrine, of course, and even James Polk, 54-50 campaign to take more territory from Canada. Look, first of all, in Panama, we all agree that the Panama Canal deal was a mistake that Jimmy Carter managed or mismanaged back in the 70s. And that's something that, is important strategically for the United States. And also we have to keep in mind the threat of China in the region with controlling 3 of the 5 ports in and around Panama Canal. But I think with Canada, that's just trolling. I mean, there's no risk that Canada is going to become the 51st state. It would be a massive drag economically. The Canadian GDP per person is around 50%, or Canadians generate 50% less per person. If Canada was a state, it would look like California, 40 million people and grossly mismanaged. And it would be there's only 4 states. It would be the 4th lowest state in terms of GDP per capita. And that's not something that we'd want to absorb. So I think there's no risk of that. I do think that many Canadians are taking this kind of lightly, and it's maybe amusing to them. It's probably not amusing to Justin Trudeau, who's having a very difficult time. But again, since Trudeau has been prime minister, the income per person in Canada that used to be 5 years ago, 80% of Americans is now 70% of Americans. And I just think that the trend is not good in Canada. The U.S. GDP is up 20%. At the same time, in Trudeau's reign, it's been flat. So this is not something that I think we should take seriously, in spite of President Trump kind of kidding around with Trudeau.
Okay, let me turn back to Kuno. Do you sound reassured by what you just heard there from Greg? And just as a follow-up to that, I'd like to ask you what kind of a reception Donald Trump Jr. has been given there in Greenland, because he's been visiting, I gather.
Well, one of my good friends, Jørgen Borsen, he went to the Trump campaign in the U.S. and helped them out in different states, and is actually also invited to the inauguration of Donald Trump. And he greeted Donald Trump Jr. here in Nuuk and chaperoned him in here. And I didn't attend those because I'm a politician, and they were here on a private matter to meet private people. So I left them alone. And but we are certainly open for his father to come here in a more official matter in the future. No problem with that. And if we can have a good relations with the U.S. and the Trump and administration and so forth, we will be very glad in regards to that. And I think he had a very good visit. They had a lunch with ordinary people here in Nuuk, where they FaceTimed with Donald Trump Sr. And he assured us through that video call that he will want to treat us very good here in Greenland. So the future doesn't look that bad for us, I think.
Okay, so you don't think the prospect of war is a likely one. And do you think perhaps there's an opportunity here for Greenland, a bit like a child whose parents are divorcing, to kind of play one power off against the other, to play Copenhagen off against Washington, and come out with quite a lot of goodies? I mean, do you think that is something that realistically people in Greenland are thinking at this particular moment? There's 57,000 of us. If the price is right, let's go into the Washington camp.
Well, once again, we are not for sale, but of course, we need our economy to be sustainable and sufficient here in Greenland, and we want to make money from our natural resources. That could be oil, gas, liquid gas, critical minerals, fisheries, tourism, whatever that could be. And even Alaska, the way they have done it, could be some kind of inspiration for Greenland in regards to how you divide the economy to the public and population. And, you know, I don't see the communication from yesterday as a threat for war. It's not about Denmark and Greenland here, but it's about the security of the North American continent, and that is absolutely understandable.
Okay, we're out of time. Thank you so much to both of you, Kuno Fenker, and thank you as well to Greg Swanson. Thank you very much for your time to both of you. Now, with less than 2 weeks to go until Donald Trump takes office, the president-elect has begun outlining what sound to some like aggressive foreign policy and economic policies. Well, as well as eyeing Greenland, Trump has expressed his desire to acquire the Panama Canal, saying that it is critical to American national security. Well, on Tuesday, Trump said he wasn't ruling out exercising military or economic coercion to further that goal of bringing the Panama Canal under US control. The canal has been solely controlled by Panama for more than 25 years. The US returned the Panama Control Zone in 1979 and ended its joint partnership in controlling the waterway back in 1999. Well, Trump's deal-closing charm has continued to be rejected by Panama. The country's foreign minister, Javier Martinez-Acha, has reacted to Trump's plans, saying the sovereignty of the canal is non-negotiable and will remain under Panamanian authority.
La soberanía de nuestro canal no es negociable.
Our canal's sovereignty is not negotiable and is part of our history of struggle and an irreversible conquest. The only hands that control the channel are Panamanian, and that will continue to be the case. We are a country open to dialogue today and always, to investments and good relations, but with the clear slogan that the homeland is first.
The Foreign Minister of Panama speaking there. Well, let's get some more analysis. We can speak to PJ Crowley, former Assistant Secretary of State under the Obama administration. Thank you very much indeed for joining us once again on Al Arabiya News. We've heard from President-elect Trump saying we need the Panama Canal for economic security. Why does he need it?
Well, I mean, the short answer is the Panama Canal is available to American shipping. Rates have gone up. There are some issues surrounding the canal and drought, which has impacted Panama. But, you know, sitting here, there's no reason to believe that, you know, a Panama Canal under Panamanian control, you know, poses an economic risk to the United States. It really doesn't.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned the fact that American ships are being charged high rates. That's one of Donald Trump's grievances, clearly, with the Panama Canal and its management. But do you think this is all part of a tactic, perhaps, to get those charges brought down?
Well, the Panama Canal is officially neutral. So it's not that American ships are being charged more and shipping from other countries are being charged less. Everyone is being charged more because it takes more water to fill the canal, to move ships through it. But, you know, you got to remember, I mean, the irony here is, here in Washington, Jimmy Carter, you know, who negotiated the return of the Panama Canal to Panama, is lying in state at the U.S. Capitol. And there's been a conservative grievance, you know, going back to the Reagan administration. You know, we built it, we paid for it, we should control it. It all feels a bit dated.
Yeah, and the other thing is that, I mean, the president of Panama, President Mulino, is described by many analysts as being incredibly pro-American. I mean, is this really the right way to treat a close ally?
The short answer is no. I mean, going back to the Carter administration, that gesture meant a great deal in terms of the United States improving, you know, its relationship with its closest neighbors to the south. Nothing would destroy U.S. credibility, you know, in Central and South America, you know, than to send, you know, the military, you know, back to take control of the canal. And oh, by the way, this is subject to treaties which have been signed between the United States and Panama. You know, so to send the military into Panama would be an act of war. It's not something that a president, you know, can do unilaterally. And so, this is a lot of noise to, call attention to, Trump, bringing attention to himself, which is what he loves, of course. Now down the road, could this have some, leverage in terms of getting, greater cooperation by Panama and other countries, in terms of migration? Maybe. But it's a lot of noise, without necessarily having a practical endgame.
Yeah, and part of the rationale back in the 1970s when President Carter handed back control of the Panama Canal to Panama itself was that other regional powers, other regional countries wouldn't appreciate that canal remaining in the hands of the United States. And I'm just wondering, if the United States does take some sort of unilateral action, I mean, how will those same countries react across Latin America? And I'm thinking particularly about Cuba and Venezuela that aren't so very far away.
Well, let's just nip that in the bud. There is no way that the president has the authority, to send military forces into Panama to take control of the treaty. He can't do it. There's no crisis. There's no authority. You'd have to get, it is a declaration. It is an act of war. He would have to get permission from Congress, to do this, and that's not going to happen. It is Donald Trump making noise to draw attention to himself, which is something that we saw during his first term, and obviously something he's going to continue to do, during his second term in office.
Yeah, so it sounds like you agree with the former U.S. ambassador to Panama, John Feely, who's quoted on U.S. media as saying it would take a war for the United States to take back the Panama Canal. I mean, do you think Donald Trump does want to start new wars? He says he doesn't.
I mean, there's nothing in his mandate that would suggest that, getting embroiled in foreign excursions, whether we're talking about Panama, we're talking about Greenland, we're talking about the Middle East. He was elected for one reason. The Americans were dissatisfied with the state of the economy or their perception of the state of the economy. They're concerned about the southern border, and they want Trump to fix problems at home, not go out looking for problems abroad that don't exist. Now, again, whether he feels he can use this in terms of, a madman theory, some leverage in terms of future negotiations, okay, fine. But obviously, the fact that we're talking about him sending military forces to Panama or seizing control of Greenland or forcing Denmark into a negotiation it is not interested in, it really undercuts American leadership. Take Greenland, for example. This is exactly what the United States has accused Vladimir Putin of doing, in Ukraine. And so it just is a lot of noise that really undercuts Trump's credibility even before he enters office for the second time.
Exactly. I mean, I was going to ask you, how might countries like Russia and China that have territorial expansion plans of their own, notably China with regards to Taiwan, how might they seize upon that very same behavior or those very same threats being used by Washington?
Well, sure. And China has worked very hard to increase its influence in Central and South America. Russia has as well, less so. But this would be a boon, to China in our own hemisphere, because obviously, China, when it works its foreign policy, is not perceived as bossing other countries around. So even with the threat, with no logical endgame, this is something that China in particular can use to curry favor with countries in our hemisphere, which again, undercuts potential U.S. influence.
Yeah, and with regards to China, last month, President Trump said that Panama was allowing Chinese soldiers to control the Panama Canal. I mean, is there any truth to that?
No. There is a Chinese international, port management company, that does help Panama operate the canal. Oh, by the way, that same Chinese company helps to operate the ports in the United States. but no, there's no current economic or military rationale for having the United States seize the Panama Canal. It's something, we've spent the last 25 years, growing the best economy in the world, with Panama Canal, controlling canal. He said this was built for military purposes, but again, that was something that might have been significant 100 years ago. But the fact is that the United States has a global navy and is operating today around the world, accommodating, Chinese or Panamanian control of the canal and moving through the canal when it needs to. That's, there's no crisis here that Trump, feels he has to solve.
Okay, so what happens next with regards to Panama? And then I'll ask you a couple of questions about some of the other territories that we're interested in as well. But I mean, with regards to Panama, the president of the country, who we've agreed is very pro-American, President Jose Raul Mulino, says the canal will remain in Panamanian hands. So what happens next? Do you envisage negotiations, some sort of talks?
Well, I mean, let's draw a lesson from the first Trump term. We remember in 2016, he said, we'll build a Great Wall and Mexico would pay for it. And in the first phone call that he had with the Mexican president said, I can't do that, and the issue went away. No doubt whenever Donald Trump speaks with the president of Panama, he'll bring it up. The Panamanian side will say, hey, it's not yours to determine, it's ours. And the issue will evaporate.
With regards to some other parts of the world, we were talking just now to some guests about the situation in Greenland. That's a territory that Donald Trump has expressed interest in on more than one occasion. In fact, he's not the first US president to express interest in Greenland. There have been various attempts to suggest that the United States purchase or acquire Greenland. What do you make of this? Is this a rational plan?
Well, I've been to Greenland, and we have valuable bases there, Greenland, is not a relic of the Cold War. It was important then, to monitor Russian military activity, and it could actually become important today and in the future as countries jockey for access and control of the Arctic. There is a strategic logic behind focusing on Greenland, but this is exactly why you have NATO. Denmark is a NATO ally. Greenland is a NATO asset. If Trump is prepared to focus attention on the Arctic, it needs, policy attention. Whereas this is where, Donald Trump's skepticism about the value of alliances butts up against global reality. Greenland is an asset, but it belongs to Denmark, and if the people of Greenland want to change the status quo, they want to become independent. They don't want to become a vassal of the United States. So again, it is a belief by Donald Trump in search of a problem that doesn't exist.
Okay, and as regards to Canada, we've heard from the outgoing Prime Minister there, Justin Trudeau, saying there isn't a snowball chance in hell that Canada will become part of the United States. What's your assessment? Is Canada on track to become the 51st state?
No. And oh, by the way, Canada has multiple provinces. I think we'd be talking about 57 or 58 states. I draw a page from Justin Trudeau. He looked at the prospect of dealing with Donald Trump again and decided to resign. Sure. Donald Trump is probably going to complain again about economic issues regarding Canada and Mexico are neighbors and are both military or economic allies, and hemispheric friends. But again, it's not going to happen.
All right, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much, PJ Crowley. Great having you with us. Thanks for your time.
A pleasure, Tom.
Now, as the US President-elect Donald Trump prepares to return to the White House on the 20th of January, one mother is waiting patiently for that day to come. This is Zuni Duarte, the mother of the former Proud Boys leader, Enrique Tarrio. Well, Tarrio was convicted for his role in the January 6th Capitol riot and given a 22-year sentence. That is the longest term given to any January 6th offender. Well, although the 41-year-old was not present during the rioting and was charged with remotely encouraging people to storm the Capitol, more than 1,500 people have been charged in connection with the riots, which saw 5 deaths and hundreds of injuries. Well, Tarrio's lawyer recently sent a letter to Donald Trump requesting for a pardon. Well, his mother, like many of the January 6th convicts, is eagerly waiting to see if the president-elect keeps his promises of clemency.
People that were doing some bad things weren't prosecuted, and people that didn't even walk into the building are in jail right now. So we'll be looking at the whole thing, but I'll be making major pardons.
President-elect Donald Trump speaking there. Well, let's cross now to Enrique Tarrio's mother, Zuni Duarte. Thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us. As we were saying, you're the mother of Enrique, the 41-year-old former leader of the Proud Boys. Your son was given a 22-year jail sentence, as we were saying, the longest of anyone, the longest jail term of anyone convicted in connection with the Capitol riots. Tell us, first of all, how Enrique is doing and where he is right now.
Thank you for giving me the time to be on your show. He's in Pollock, Louisiana at the moment. He's been there for, I believe, like a month now. So he's staying strong, head up, and hopeful, and that we get justice on this situation.
Okay, and obviously January the 6th has just passed 2 days ago. That same process of election certification was taking place that was happening in 2021. This time around, there was no drama. Seems like there's a smooth transition of power there in the United States. But did a part of you think perhaps there could be another outbreak of violence?
No, I never thought that. I think the American citizens voted on November 5th, and the outcome was what it should have been years ago. So I think everybody was happy, and I didn't expect anything to happen.
Okay, so of course, January 6th anniversary has just been marked, the 4-year anniversary. Your son was labeled a primary organizer, but he wasn't actually there, was he, at the Capitol when the riots broke out? Just tell us a bit more about what his role was.
Well, there's a difference about being there or not being there. He was not there, obviously, and also he did not plan or conspire at any point. So yeah, it was, he was labeled. I'm glad that you used that word. He was labeled for doing that, yet there was no communication between him and his group, which were the fewer of the thousands that were on January 6th Capitol grounds that day.
But it's been quoted in various reports that his social media interactions were intercepted. He's quoted as saying, "Do what must be done." In another message, he's reported to have said, "Make no mistake, we did this." I mean, does he deny having had a role now?
Yes, he does deny having the role, because we did this is a lot of people, the thousands of people that were there actually did that. They protested, and they used their freedom of speech to let the government know that they did not agree with the outcome of the elections the year before. So yes, and going back to those text messages that you say, they were all taken out of context, and yes, they were published, but nothing indicates that there was a conspiracy or a plan to commit any kind of overthrowing the government or insurrection. There was no arms that day. And again, Enrique's group was a small group compared to the thousands that were there, American citizens that were on the ground that day.
I mean, your son would have been there, wouldn't he, were it not for the fact that he'd been arrested a couple of days beforehand for burning a Black Lives Matter flag outside a church in D.C. I mean, he would probably have been there, wouldn't he?
He would have been there. So that creates a lot of questioning whether things would have been different in the sense of his particular group, because he cannot control, again, the thousands that were there. But maybe things would have been a little bit more calm. And, you know, but he was not there. The bottom line is he wasn't there to be able to say or control or do anything of that sort.
I mean, not so long ago, and a long time after those events of January the 6th, I think it was in September 2023, he called the Capitol attack, quote, a national embarrassment. He said he'll have to live with the shame of that for the rest of his life. I mean, it sounds like he really regrets what happened. I mean, do you think he regrets what happened, or do you think that he regrets the fact that he got caught and sent to prison?
No, I don't think he got caught doing anything, honestly. And there's no regrets. If you regret, you don't live. And there's no regrets. Whether it was a shame what happened on that day, that's true. A lot of it was also the not planning of the government or not using the proper forces, knowing that there was a January 6th coming up, and, you know, knowing those that had the power to do something did not. There was a lot of FBI agents on the ground. We know that at this point. There was a lot of undercover people on the grounds that day, and they weren't prepared for that. But I don't think there's any regrets. I think we all regret that happened the way it happened. But there's no regrets that we have a right to protest and, you know, exercise our freedom of speech.
What went through your mind when you watched the events unfolding at the Capitol? I mean, I expect, like millions of other Americans who are watching live footage from D.C., the like of which no one's ever seen before.
It was surprising. We were proud that Americans were there. Most of us were sitting home, and there was thousands of people doing what we wanted them to do, to protest, to let the government know. So it was a mix of emotions. Again, things didn't go as calm as they should have gone. But then there was a lot of, you know, insight from the government that could have been avoiding other issues that happened.
Yeah, I mean, within a day and a half of January the 6th happening, I mean, 5 people had died. Of course, there were dozens of people, not least police officers, who were severely injured. I mean, some parents and loved ones aren't going to have the opportunity that you might have now to be reunited with someone they love, namely your son. I mean, do you think it's fair on them that your son should be freed from prison?
Yes, I do think it's fair. I think it's fair for all these men to be given their lives back. Ashley Babbitt was a veteran, and her life was taken by a Metropolitan Police officer. So we only not think of the police officer, we think of the civilians, that this all could have been avoided. My son was not the director of this or the head of that situation. These men are American men, and they have been imprisoned without bond for 4 years for going into the Capitol. Most of them were let in by Metropolitan Police officers and directed as to where to go. We see part of the videos, but we must see them all to get a proper vision of what happened there that day. If some officers, one officer died, he committed suicide, and maybe that officer shouldn't have been in the force to begin with if things would be checked properly by the government.
Have you ever been in contact with any of the families of any of the people who were injured or killed as a result of January 6th?
No, my son's doing 22 years, and I haven't been contacted either. My son is in a federal prison, going hungry and cold a lot of the times. We're all a victim in this, so it's time to settle and forgive and start a new nation.
When you say he's going hungry, I mean, is he being deprived of his rights in prison?
Well, he's been in solitary confinement most of the time that he's been there. He's been moved 35 times since March 8th of 22. So to a certain point, he is deprived not only of his freedom, but of a lot of human rights that we have.
I mean, he was the chairman of the Proud Boys. You're his mom. Did you ever worry before any of this happened about him getting mixed up in this kind of thing, or did you give him your full support? My
son always has my full support. He is a good man. He was the chairman of the Proud Boys, which is a group that helped against Antifa in a lot of senses. And we need to raise awareness about that Antifa was a bad group of people, and Proud Boys defended a lot of the communities against that type of attacks.
Let's just talk about what happens next. Your son was offered, I understand, and correct me if I'm wrong, he was offered a plea deal, but he rejected it. I'm just wondering why he did that.
He rejected the plea deal because he was innocent, because he had nothing to do with that, because they wanted him to lie, and he refuses for that to happen. A lot of the men of J6ers and all 5 of our indictment were offered plea deals, and they did not take them, because they knew that justice would come one day, and they knew that they had done nothing wrong but use their rights to freedom of speech.
Okay, and in terms of next steps, you obviously published that letter on Monday, well, the lawyer representing your son did, calling on President-elect Trump to pardon your son. I mean, have you heard anything from the Trump transition team since then?
No, we haven't heard anything. None of the families have heard anything from the transition team or from the administration directly. We didn't expect it. We know that President Trump and his administration will do the right thing.
I mean, there is one catch, which is that during the trial, Enrique's lawyer, Naib Hassan, actually blamed Donald Trump for what happened on January the 6th. And he said, quote, "It was Donald Trump's words. It was his motivation. It was not Enrique Tarrio. They want to use Enrique Tarrio as a scapegoat for Donald J. Trump and those in power." I mean, do you think that's likely to weigh on the mind of Donald Trump as he decides which people to give the pardon to?
No, I don't think that's going to weigh on his mind because Donald Trump told people to go to the Capitol. Donald Trump did not say for things to happen the way they happened. One thing is to tell you to walk to a building and peacefully manifest. And other thing is the instigation that the officers and the government did with those people on the ground. So no, I don't think it's going to weigh in. I think he's going to be a fair president, as he has always been. And I believe that he will keep his word to what he knows that should be done or that's fair and just.
Okay, so on the one hand, your son was unfairly targeted by the Biden administration in the words of his supporters. But at the same time, do you think it's the fault of Donald Trump that January 6th happened in the first place?
No, I didn't say that. I don't think what happened on January 6th was Donald Trump's fault at all. I think he made a comment and people went to the Capitol, walked to the Capitol after hearing him. But I don't think it was his fault at all. Absolutely. I think there was people in the administration that could have done a better job, like Nancy Pelosi could have done a better job. And a lot of people in his administration could have done a better job to control that situation. But I don't think it was Donald Trump's decision of what happened that day. I don't think that at all.
But Enrique's lawyer did say they want to use Enrique as a scapegoat for Donald J. Trump. I mean, it does sound like he thinks it was Trump's fault.
No, we don't think it was fun. I don't think Attorney Naib Hassan said it in that fashion. I think, yes, has being used as a scapegoat now after the Biden administration. Yes, absolutely. He was used. His face was used by the DOJ, the empowered and weaponized DOJ and the FBI to make a point. And actually, if you ask me personally, I don't think prosecution did a good job at all. I think the fact that the trial was in a D.C. courtroom made a world of difference with 12 jurors that from the D.C. area. And now we know after elections that 97 or 98% of those jurors were probably Democrats. So we had no chance at all going in. Whether he was used as scapegoat, definitely yes, he has.
What do you think Enrique will do if he is pardoned?
I'm not sure. I guess that's a question for Enrique to answer. For sure, he's going to enjoy his life a lot more. But I don't know what his political views will be after he is released.
Do you reckon he'll go back to working with organisations like the Proud Boys, or do you think do you detect from what he's saying that he'd, because we did hear remorse from him, we did hear some regret from him during the trial. Do you think he'll perhaps do something completely different with his life?
He may do something completely different with his life. Again, there was no regrets, but there is regrets as to the time that he did not spend with family to dedicate to his political visions and to the Proud Boys. So in that aspect, there may be major changes.
Yeah, and Zuni, just lastly, I can imagine this has had a huge impact on you personally. I mean, a massive ordeal for a parent to go through. What are you going to do if your son is free? What will be the first thing you do?
Oh, God, give him a huge hug. This has been a big, horrific situation that I never thought I was going to be in. He's been in jail for 4 years. He's been in a cage for 4 years. So for us, it means the world to have these men have their lives back, not only Enrique. We're talking about thousands of American citizens and young men that need to get their lives back. So it's going to be a big change. Even in my life, it will be a big change.
Okay, well, we really appreciate you taking the time to speak to us. Zuni Duarte, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Tom, for having me on. I really appreciate your time.
Well, staying with the United States, where wildfires are wreaking havoc in Los Angeles. A raging blaze has forced more than 30,000 people to flee, with strong winds fanning the flames towards the city. Well, around 200,000 people are estimated to be without power. Well, evacuation orders are in place in several areas around LA. And another major blaze is raging northwest of Los Angeles, and that too is prompting further evacuations. Well, footage coming out of the affected areas show thick black smoke and burning vegetation for miles as residents frantically try to escape what can only be described as apocalyptic scenes. Well, firefighters and other safety personnel are out in full force, but they're struggling to contain the blazes. Well, the California Governor Gavin Newsom says all hands are on deck, and he added that more than 1,400 firefighting personnel are in place to, quote, combat these unprecedented fires. Well, the National Weather Service has issued the highest alert for extreme fire conditions for much of Los Angeles County right up until the 9th of January, predicting wind gusts of up to 160 kilometers per hour in some areas. Well, low humidity and dry vegetation from a lack of rainfall have proven to be a dangerous combination of factors, described by the National Weather Service as, quote, about as bad as it gets in terms of fire weather. Well, let's get the latest now, and we can speak to Margaret Stewart, spokesperson for the Los Angeles Fire Department. Thank you so much for speaking to us at what's no doubt an extremely busy time for you. We understand there's more than one wildfire in the area. What's the status of the fires? Are they spreading?
Well, they're all individual fires that weren't, they're not a part of an extension of each other. So, our main one we have is down in Pacific Palisades. That's the one that started yesterday morning about 10:30 here. Our second one is up in the valley north of Los Angeles, in the north end of Los Angeles. That's called the Hearst Fire. And then Pasadena, which is a separate city with a separate fire department, has a fire that's kind of in the northeast. It's a town called Altadena. So that's southeast of the Hearst Fire, but a distance away. It's not a situation of those being created off of one another. And then we have a much smaller fire in what's an area called the Sepulveda Basin, which is a big open field area. There's no homes threatened in that fire.
Okay, so clearly a huge challenge for firefighters. I gather your teams are using aircraft to douse the flames. I mean, are they being effective? Are the fires showing any signs of being contained at this stage?
Well, unfortunately, the winds are so extreme that our aircraft were grounded as of about between 7 and 8 p.m. last night. We have winds gusting over 80 miles per hour, which is hurricane force winds, and it grounds our rotary wing and fixed wing aircraft. We're hoping the fixed wing have a higher threshold for winds. They're able to fly in more severe winds than our helicopters can. So we're hoping the fixed wing will be able to get up this morning. But but the winds are not forecasted to improve. They're going to be sustained, which will likely keep our helicopters on the ground. And that's what makes this so difficult, because a wind-driven fire like this, we can't just stop it on the ground. We need the air support. So our priority is protecting life and defending structures to our best of our ability.
I mean, as you say, I mean, a really dangerous combination of factors that have made the job of containing the fires all the more difficult. And, you know, it just sounds like, listening to Governor Gavin Newsom, that it's no longer fire season, he says, it's fire year. I mean, it suggests that you're going to be seeing more of these kinds of fires. Does that sound right to you?
You know, we don't get a lot of precipitation here. You know, over this winter, we've had less than a half an inch of rain in Southern California. So that's year on year. You know, we have been in a drought for a very long time. And while one season we might get more rain, the vegetation grows and then it dries out. So we now have more brush to burn. It's, you know, our society now, where we have all of these beautiful hills, people want to build their homes. And so we have homes, you know, right inside all of these hills and the vegetation. And it results in this sad situation when the winds are so strong that the fire runs, and we just can't stop it from the ground. And unfortunately, you know, there are a lot of homes that are being lost.
There are, and we've received reports about those, and we've received reports that at least 30,000 people have been evacuated. But do you think it's likely that some people could be trapped in areas that simply aren't accessible?
Well, the evacuation started, you know, yesterday late morning in the early afternoon. So most of the Palisades area has been fully evacuated. Our law enforcement partners, LAPD, helped manage that physical evacuation of getting into all the areas. We received a lot of 911 calls from individuals who weren't able to get out of their home. A lot of times it's a mobility issue or they need help. So one by one, we had resources sent up to assist those people. It of course, is entirely possible that there are still people remaining in isolated areas, but we don't currently have reports of that.
But I mean, these fires sound like they spread so fast. I'm just wondering whether there was actually time enough to issue the warnings of the approaching fires and for people to get out in time.
Well, so we knew these winds were coming. And for the last several days prior to this fire, we had been messaging all of our communities. We have a program we call Ready, Set, Go. And it's all about having an evacuation plan, having an evacuation go bag ready, and being prepared for an evacuation. Unfortunately, you know, human nature, and we think, oh, it's not going to happen to us, we'll be okay. And combined with people wanting to stay and protect their home, which we understand, but we know, given the environment, you're not going to be able to do anything with a garden hose to protect your home. And when you stay and you evacuate late, you know, it makes a more challenging situation.
I mean, as we've been talking, we've been looking at devastating scenes of homes being destroyed. I mean, the screen, very much a scene of flames. Again, your governor in California has declared a state of emergency, and I'm assuming that means extra resources will be earmarked for California. I mean, do you have enough resources? Do you have what's necessary? And can other fire departments in other states help you out?
So we have a state fire service agency called CAL FIRE, and they manage bringing resources from outside of our region into a fire like this. So we have our first line of defense is our department. We have a robust department, 3,500 sworn members. We had augmented resources. We had 14 extra fire engines that were staffed and placed in these high-risk areas so we could provide an immediate response. We also have what's called mutual aid, which is where our neighboring agencies like LA County, Santa Monica, Beverly Hills, when we have an immediate need, we respond in and assist, just like we go to help them. So we also had them in place. And then it will be followed up by additional resources provided by CAL FIRE. So we have the resources. That's not the challenge right now. The challenge is the weather.
And just lastly, and I'll let you go, I mean, any signs that the weather could be set to change, or any circumstances might perhaps mean that there is some respite and some of those fires can be contained?
The winds are not forecasted to improve in the immediate future, basically through today. The worst of the winds were yesterday afternoon through today. So we still have a fight in front of us.
All right. Well, thank you very much indeed. We really appreciate you taking the time to speak to us. Margaret Stewart at the Los Angeles Fire Department, thank you. Well, that is all we have time for on Global News today. Thank you very much indeed for watching. Be sure to join us again tomorrow for more exclusive interviews. Until then, goodbye.
At Arabiya News, we go beyond the headlines.
From the latest breaking news to in-depth coverage of global events.
We're not bought or sold. Nobody owns us.
The loss of life, the destruction of property. The conflicts are such a terrible thing.
Context and analysis to help you see the full picture.
The world is in a very dangerous place.
Join us on Arabiya News,
It's very impressive.
where knowledge meets perspective.
Cape Town. See what nature and culture have to offer in Cape Town. Cape Town is the second largest city in South Africa and the southernmost city of the African continent. It is home to the famous Cape of Good Hope, where you'll get a thrilling glimpse of where the Atlantic meets the Indian Ocean. The city is also known for the Castle of Good Hope, with its extensive William Fair collection of art and military memorabilia. Another iconic destination is the Robben Island, which offers visitors a first-hand experience of the imprisoned history of leaders like Nelson Mandela and Walter Sisulu. The prison not only holds important historic significance, it also allows for a beautiful half-day ferry ride across the sparkling waters of South Africa. Over 20 million tourists also visit the Victoria and Alfred waterfront each year. It is known as the city's working harbor, where you can have plenty to do in terms of dining, shopping, and sightseeing. One of the 7 magnificent botanical gardens of the world, you should also have a look at the luscious and rare flora of Cape Town at the Kirtenbosch Botanical Gardens. You'll definitely come across impressive rows of rare African plants. It's a great place for botanical education. There are also a lot of marine life to see in the city. Cape Town offers a rare and up-close glimpse of these underwater animals while in their natural habitat. Table Mountain is the greatest and most popular landmark of Cape Town. It's one of the famous places in the city that features an incredibly unique and varied ecosystem. It's also suitable for leisurely walks or morning jogs, and great for hiking up to the summit. You can enjoy a hearty meal while at it, or simply take in the magnificent view. There are also many vineyards worth visiting in Cape Town. Along the endless stretch of hills and valleys are the vineyards that make the best wines in the world. Heavy with local culture are the colorful streets of Bo-Kaap. It is popular among the visitors of Cape Town, offering a lively glimpse into the culture of the Muslim descendants who created these enchanting streets.
Hello and welcome to Arabiya News. I'm your host, Michal Prendergast. I'm thrilled to say I'm joined by the star of Shark Tank USA and millionaire investor, Kevin O'Leary. So, Kevin, the world has been shocked about the return of Donald Trump. Are you shocked?
No. The Democratic Party lost its way. They're no longer in touch with the electorate. There was a certain arrogance they had, and I think the problem started when Biden left the ticket, because in the democratic process, usually you have a convention, and so you start from scratch, and that process weeds out any weakness in candidates. If they have an inability to articulate their position, for example, or they're not able to debate their colleagues or whatever. But the other advantage of the convention, and there's been many very famous conventions back as far as the 40s, 50s, and 60s, is that the party realigns itself with a new message because it's trying to figure out what's the best candidate for the times. And they also get a tremendous amount of press, almost 5-6 weeks of press. That's not what happened here. What occurred was, I don't know if you want to call them the party elite, but the Pelosi's, the Schumers, the Obama,
the deep
even
state,
some movie stars, you know, they said, well, we're going to anoint Harris. And that was a mistake because Harris, well, a very fine person, I'm sure, has never won anything. And last time she tried this, she didn't get a single delegate. So in 2020, in 2019, she failed. 2020, she failed. She failed again in 2024. The analogy I think that is best serving this thing is the Super Bowl of all political contests on earth is the American presidential election. There's no greater political event on earth. And if your quarterback gets injured, which is what Biden was, you don't put in a new quarterback that's never played a game or ever won one, ever. They got shellacked, and they've learned an important lesson. I looked at that map, the electoral map, while covering the election. It was turning redder than a lobster being boiled. I mean, he just took the nation. And I think they're doing a little soul searching now. But they had it coming to them. And as I like to say, Trump did them a huge favor. He actually helped that party. They don't know it yet, but they're going to have to take a spatula to it and scrape all of those candidates away and start from scratch with new leadership. They'll be a very competitive party. There's a lot of talent in the Democratic Party that never got a chance to compete. Now they will.
Yeah, and speaking of Donald Trump, I've heard you say every Democrat has to thank him for saving American entrepreneurship and the American economy.
Yeah, the concept, some of the ideas being proposed, specifically taxing unrealized gains, that's un-American. The idea of price controls, Soviet-style price controls, that's un-American. The focus on gender identity was not the #1 concern of people that can't even afford chicken on their kitchen table. So when you get that lost, the system corrects itself, and that's exactly what happened. That's the amazing thing about democracy. When you try and stretch it too far in any direction, boom, it self-corrects. Now, you happen to be in the way of the self-correction, you get decimated, and that's what happened to that party.
Yes, and the effect of social media has been really interesting. Obviously, Elon Musk has played a huge part. Obviously, he paid it $44 billion. Do you see that as a good investment in the future of free speech?
Well, as an investment, it wasn't a good investment because it's valued now at 11 to 12 billion. But that doesn't matter. What he did do is keep alive the concept of free speech, because in a democracy, you're always dealing with 2.5% lunatic fringe. The cost of freedom of speech is the lunatic fringe. The minute you try and shut down the lunatic fringe, you're moving away from the concept freedom of speech. Everybody has a voice. You may not like what they say, but because they're part of the narrative, that is the core and the DNA of democracy. And so many ideas get tested, some get thrown out. And when you try and change that, again, the system self-corrects, and that's what happened here. So it's a very divided country now. We are going to have a new president with a full mandate. I mean, it looks like he's going to win the Senate and the House and the presidency. You can get a lot done for the first 2 years when you control everything. And so that's what's going to happen.
And obviously Trump in his first 4 years, it might have been called a little inexperienced. I think this time he won't mess around.
Well, he's actually signaled the market that he intends to hire seasoned veterans, AAA players, that don't have a mandate to go in the White House and write a book 6 weeks later after they're fired. He doesn't want that. He doesn't want a rotating door anymore. He wants A players, and he's grooming his... he's got some very interesting people working on the inside to find the right people for every single position in cabinet. And I think it's going to be a fantastic government because it's going to focus on what the people want. They want security at the border. They've already said that. They want a reduction in inflation. The way you do that is you reduce energy costs. They want to strip away all the regulatory environment that the Biden administration put on. $1 trillion worth of burdensome regulation. He will tear that off like a Band-Aid, rip it right off, and the economy, as you can see, indexed by the market, the buoyancy that happened as soon as they figured out that he was going to be president, was pretty happy with that outcome. This is good for business. And when the economy is buoyant and people are getting employed, it's good for everybody. So, you know, the Democrats are licking their wounds, but in 6 weeks, everybody forget about it, and we'll move on. It'll be a great thing for everybody. I think the U.S. is in a renaissance period. And I'm not really shilling for politicians. I never do that. I shill for policy. I care about policy. I care about entrepreneurship. I care about investing. I care about the American dream. I'm an ambassador for it. I want that to work because my family, you know, is American and they're working in the U.S. I want the best we can get for that country every day. And this is how you do it.
And speaking in terms of efficiency, Elon Musk has famously, he sacked or he got rid of 85% of Twitter, and it's still running pretty flawlessly. There's been a lot of speculation that he might get the Secretary of State for Government Efficiency. Would you like to see that? What could someone like Elon Musk do in terms of saving tax dollars?
I don't think he'll take an actual specific role in cabinet. I think what he will do is be a consultant for the American people, identify inefficiencies, and get the whacking stick out. I love that idea. I love the idea that we've never really scraped the fat out of the federal government, and it's big, porky, fat, dripping with opportunity to cut. But the only way you can do that is you need a mandate from the top dog, the president, because no agency wants to be downsized. You walk in saying, I want to fire a third of you. They're not going to help you. But he'll identify opportunity. I call it release the hounds. Because what taxpayer, regardless of what your politics are, red or blue or independent, who wouldn't want to save money by just chopping out all the waste in the federal government? And I think if there's one man that has the ability to do that, proven executional skills, it's Elon Musk. So I really endorse this idea.
Well, I think it could be a great team, obviously, with Donald Trump and the art of the deal. To speak on the international scale, with tariffs, obviously it's a word that Trump has bandied around a lot. What does that mean for, I suppose, the average Joe in America and for the future of international trade? We're looking at China, we're looking at EV production. What do Trump's tariffs mean?
So tariffs were used as a form of rhetoric, weaponry during the election cycle. Harris called them sales tax, like a VAT tax that we have in Europe. That's not what they are. In fact, there's a bill cruising around the Hill right now in the U.S. It's a tariff reciprocal act. And what it says is any of our trading partners that impose tariffs will put a reciprocal, identical tariff. So if Germany puts 10% on cars, we'll put 10% on their cars coming to the U.S., that kind of thing. And of course, you know, there's a new act, the new NAFTA 2.0, if you want to call it that governs Canada, the United States, and Mexico, big trading partners. The one entity that I think you're going to see a lot more pressure on is China. China doesn't abide by the rules of the WTO. They joined in 1999 with all kinds of promises to play by the rules. They never did. So I'm an advocate for using tariffs to squeeze their heads like teenage pimples. And the way I make that is, point that out, is to say, look, the only way a supreme leader stays in power perpetually is everybody has bread and butter. You have to have a job. Otherwise, you riot against the supreme leader. And that's just the way it is in a communist dictatorship. So the way you squeeze the supreme leader's head is you say, look, let's pick a sector. I'm just going to use an example. Yoga mats. Let's say the U.S. orders 1 million yoga mats a week from China. You put a 400% tariff on it. And all the people making yoga mats in China lose their jobs. And they don't have any bread and butter anymore. And the supreme leader goes, oh my goodness, I don't have any jobs for these yoga mat makers. And then you say, well, where else can we inflict some damage? Let's do it in this sector. Put on 400% tariff there, squeezing that teenage pimple till it pops. Then he gets on an airplane and flies to Washington saying, just kidding, just kidding. I want to work out and be part of the, Reciprocal Tariff Act. Because China only understands the stick. They don't understand anything else.
It's a game of chicken.
Well, Trump scares his adversaries because he's unpredictable. He's just very unpredictable. When you know what your adversary is going to do all the time and they signal it to you beforehand, you're not scared of him anymore. They're scared shitless of Trump. And that's, excuse my French, but that's basically how it works. That's why you're seeing all these guys saying, oh, we want to have peace now. No, we want to stop. Because he's very unpredictable. So in the case of China, squeezing the supreme leader to the table is a good thing. So I would like to go to 400% tariffs. Because I do business in China. They don't play by the rules.
And how about on EVs? Because obviously, even a 20% or even a 30% tariff on EVs, I believe in the EU, they're trying to flood the market. Obviously, Germany's not happened. We've seen Volkswagen cut 1,000 jobs in 2 months ago.
The point is, tariffs are temporary. They're a negotiating tactic. But if you're going to put them on, don't screw around. Go to 400%. Make it impossible for them to sell any widgets anywhere. So if you put 400% on an EV, no one's going to buy it. Only the Chinese can buy it. So all the people making the EVs, no bread, no butter. That's how you do it. Now, if I was the minister of Chinese head squeezing, that's how I would do it. And believe me, they will be at the table so fast because they cannot afford to have unemployment in that economy. And it's showing some cracks there. So you want to hit them while they're down and bring them to the table. They cheat on IP, they steal, you can't use their courts. A good example that people should focus on is Twitter, or not Twitter, but TikTok. TikTok has been deemed Chinese spyware by the American Congress. That's a bipartisan bill. By midnight on Jan 19th in the U.S., the servers are going to get turned off.
I've heard you say as well that you would like to buy it, a consortium. Do you want to buy Twitter?
Yeah,
TikTok?
I would definitely buy TikTok. I would buy it because it's a great, it depends what I get with it. If I don't get the algorithm, all I'm getting is a mailing list, so I pay a lot less for that. But we'll see how this goes because, remember, they did this in India. After 4 years, they had 200 million users on it, and the supreme leader would not, play by the rules with the Indian government, and they said, we'll just turn it off. And everybody was squeamish for a week, and then they forgot about it. They just drifted onto other social media platforms. So, again, squeezing the supreme leader's head there is good. And it is spyware. I would never put that on a phone that I have sensitive data on. It's Chinese spyware. Everybody knows that. That's why it's shut down. They just shut it down in Canada. I mean, they're going to shut it down everywhere. But this is the arrogance of the supreme leader. He doesn't care. So you've got to squeeze his head. He will appreciate the head squeezing. He will thank you for it.
And is it the same, obviously, with the likes of Vladimir Putin and the war between Israel and Hamas? War is not good for business. Do you think Trump is going to have a large enough impact? He said famously, I will stop the wars within the first day of office. Do you think that's true?
Putin understands force. Not a very nice guy. He's killed a lot of people. But 25,000 young Russians a month lose their lives. He's buying their services now. There's no more patriots left. You get coffin money, your family gets a house, but you go die or get blown up. That's pretty brutal. So I would think giving him a call and saying, look, I've been thinking about this war. I don't like it. I don't want to pay for the Ukrainian costs, and I want it to stop. Come to the table, or I'll do something that will really surprise you, which is probably what people worry about with Trump, because we saw how he ended the Syrian conflict by just saying, I'm going to kill this guy. And he did. And I think that kind of erratic nature is what these adversaries worry about. Now, a lot of NATO players don't like to hear this, but I think war's horrible. I think all these people and children losing their lives is horrible. It's just, somebody has to stop this.
Exactly, and on a human level, but as well as
obviously
markets. So it affects the bread and butter as well. So you're taking food off of people's tables, affecting jobs, as well as the human suffering. It's bad all around.
It is. So I think people are willing to try a different way. Now, whether it's Trump successful or not, we'll see. But this carnage of death of young children, I can't watch it anymore. No one can.
Of course.
It's got to stop.
Then, moving on to cryptocurrency, we've seen markets, as well as the price of Bitcoin increase. It broke $72,000, I believe, in the past few days. Do you believe under Trump, what is the height that you think it can get to under a Trump presidency?
So Trump has signaled, and the market knows this, that he is in favor of digital payment system, which includes Bitcoin, which is an asset class. I'm not saying that's a digital payment system, but it's no different than gold. I mean, you can own some gold, you can own some Bitcoin. I own both. What the problem is, we don't have institutional support for it yet because it's not regulated in the U.S. The way other commodities are. So the rumor on the street is that the CFTC, which regulates commodities, is going to get the mandate for crypto, and they're looking for someone to run it. And they'll probably take a lot of that away from Gensler at the SEC, who's been litigating this sector, and successfully, I might add. He's, all the crypto cowboys, like Binance, CZ, he's a felon now. You know what happened to Sam Bankman-Fried. So people that took on Gensler all lost, and this is probably a good thing. So we move into a phase now where it's going to be regulated. There's a lot of optimism about it. Here in Abu Dhabi, we have the M2 exchange, which is a very interesting idea because it's completely compliant with its regulator. I see a lot of upside coming in crypto.
And a figure, just briefly, do you think, what's the limit? Do you think it can reach
I think
200K under a Trump presidency?
I think we'll all see 100,000 shortly. I feel everybody should have 5% weighting in gold in their portfolio. Nothing wrong with 5% weighting in Bitcoin. I mean, why not? I mean, unless you really think, and you don't have to do this, I'm just saying alternative asset classes in times of uncertainty and inflation are good. I mean, I own gold and I've had it my whole life. I was given a locket from my Irish father when I was 11 years old that had a gold coin in it. That's when I fell in love with it. I've had that ever since. And I own bullion, I own ETFs. I mean, gold is gold. The Romans loved it, I love it. Bitcoin is the new. It's not as old as gold, but it's performed very well for me.
Yeah. And just lastly, speaking on gold, obviously to have Kevin O'Leary, Mr. Wonderful in the studio, it would be a shame if I didn't ask about watches. You are, I would say, the most famous watch collector in the world now, doing millions of views on YouTube every month with the likes of Teddy Baldassar. He has just opened his new watch shop. I want to ask you, would you ever think of entering the watch strap business? The red bands are... They're synonymous with you.
It's a great question, but what I've learned about watch collecting and getting access, I mean, the thing that in my journey into horology is, in order to get watchmakers that are really unique, who make only a few pieces a year, you need to be known as a collector. And what does that mean? It means that you support the art. It's no different than contemporary art, and you don't flip them. So flipping a watch, when you get a reputation for buying it at the entry price from the watchmaker and then turning around and selling it for 4 times that the next week, you're not a collector. You're just a flipper. And the watch community is very small. In terms of the makers, there's probably 25 makers of consequence worldwide. The word gets out overnight that you're not a real collector. And so it takes a long time to earn the trust of an F.P. Journe or a Simon Britt or any of these makers. And I'm known I've never sold a watch. And so I have a very vast collection, and I'm a dial guy, as you know. So I'm always looking for the new dial. I'm wearing a Moser, a unique dial here. And of course, this is a classic Daytona. I thought, this is New York time, this is Abu Dhabi time. And so I support. The thing about getting into the business of retailing watches or retailing bands is all of a sudden...
I'd buy it, Kevin.
Yeah, no, I'm
100%.
You're no
I'll pay a
longer
pretty
a collector.
penny for an O'Leary band.
But I'm very fortunate. Every watch company knows I won't wear it unless it has a red band. So they don't even offer me watches if they can't put a red band on. I would never buy them. So my whole thing's red band because it looks fantastic. Great with gold, great with platinum. I mean, this looks gorgeous. Works with my red.
Of course.
I just wonder if
like on Shark Tank.
Yeah, the whole thing is, you know, it's just over the years it's become one of my things. But each maker, watches are really a beautiful thing because they mark a period in your life. Every time I do a big deal, I buy a new watch, and I associate that deal with that watch. And, you know, my daughters try and steal them, my wife, my son. Nobody gets to touch my watches. Like, that's it. That's the one thing that I've got. They're in vaults all around the world, you know, and I just love it. I just have so much fun. And the reason I like it is the community of watch collectors that I know all around the world are very eclectic. Surgeons, artists, financiers, royalty, you name it. And
journalists?
Yes, journalists. We share the passion of watches, and I think it enriches my life.
Great. Kevin O'Leary, a millionaire investor, host of the Smash Hit Show at the Shark Tank. Thank you so much for your time.
You got it. Thank you.
From the White House to Gaza, Kiev to Beijing, elections, economics and the environment compete with conflicts and other complex issues for our attention. In an age of fake news, deep fake and artificial intelligence,
they've got to have a vote and a say.
It's important to look beyond the loudest voice to understand the truth. From newsmakers to groundbreakers,
my campaign is going very well.
Presidents, prime ministers, princes and peacemakers, and cultural tasters.